Today's episode of the Arc Junkies podcast is brought to you by my good friends at Outlaw Leather. I've got a question for you, Arc Junkies. Can you have too many welding hoods? No, you can't. And if you answered yes, you may not have been in welding long enough. One of the most important tools we have as a welder is our hood. Without our hood, we're useless. Let's face it, stuff happens and having a backup hood is a necessity. As I was always told in the Marines, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. I've always carried an extra fixed shade welding hood as a backup with a number 10 gold mirror lens. I learned to do this after my first auto dark failed me when I was out on a job site and I got caught in a rainstorm while welding some decking on a building. I was useless the rest of the day as a welder because I couldn't weld. My hood was fried. So I had to punk rods and material for the rest of the crew for the remainder of the day. Luckily for you though, Outlaw Leather has new Pro Liner welding hoods available right now starting at $69.99 with a flip-up and a non-flip-up version as well. Shop outlawleather.com and pick up a spare hood. And while you're there, check out some of their other awesome accessories. And as a listener to the Arc Junkies podcast, you can save 15% on all in-stock handmade leather goods when you use Arc Junkies in the discount box at checkout. That's outlawleather.com. We're also brought to you by CK Worldwide, the standard in TIG welding. The only torches I run at my school are CK because, let's face it, new welders are hard on equipment and accessories, and I want my investment to last. But that's not the only place I run CK torches. I like them so much at work, I use them at the home shop as well. More especially, I use the Flex Lock 360. There's not a spot I can't get to with my Flex Lock 360. Sure, flex heads are nice, but, they have their limitations. But with the Flex Lock 360 and a gas lens, I can hit all the right angles in the most awkward and tightest spots. CK is constantly innovating the TIG game. While others are stuck on the same basic setup and consumables from the 1960s, CK Worldwide is blazing a trail of innovation with their gas saver kits, wedge collets, volcanic cups, and laser tungsten. Trust CK for all your TIG welding needs on both AC and DC current and water-cooled and gas-cooled systems. There's a reason CK is the standard in TIG welding. Find out for yourself today by visiting ckworldwide.com and hitting that Find a Dealer tab to see which CK products are right for you. CK Worldwide, the standard in TIG welding. What's up, Arc Junkies? Joining me today is my good friend Scott Witkowski. Scott is the Vice President of Republic Testing Labs in LaPorte, Texas. I first met Scott a couple years ago at the adult welding competition in Houston, Texas. Since then, Scott and I have become really good friends, and he's become a great mentor of mine for all things related to codes, standards, inspections, and testing. I'm sure you guys are going to enjoy this episode, so fire up your machines, drop your hood, and turn me up 5.
Thank you for downloading show number 318 of the Arc Junkies podcast.
You're listening to the Arc Junkies podcast, helping you make every weld better than your last with each episode. And now your host, Jason Becker.
All right, what's up, Han?
How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, man. So, I've had you've been on the show a couple times, but you've always been here with a guest. I think the first time you came on, you were here with Calais and Mike. We talked about the adult welding competition. Then you were back on for the hydrogen workshop with Bill Newell, yeah. And then you came and Mike again, and then I think I've had you on for an AWS Weld Wednesday, but I've never had Scott Witkowski by himself on the podcast, like Arc Junkies podcast. You've done, like I said, we've done a couple different things, but yeah, man, welcome to the show, brother. It's been a long time coming.
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate you having me on, man. It's fun. Always fun visiting with you, for sure.
Yeah, I love chatting with you. We get to nerd out and geek out on codes and standards, and I learn a lot of stuff from you. You become a really good mentor of, for me. In this industry, especially as I've kind of branched off on my own, got into the world of inspection and weld certifications and testing and all that stuff. And like I said, if I usually can't figure it out, you're one of the people in the top 3 that I pick up my phone and I'll hit you on speed dial or shoot a text, and you've never not answered me. So I appreciate everything you've done for me along, my journey the past couple of years.
Well, it's a two-way relationship, I mean, if it don't, I call you for things when I need things as well, because there's things that you're good at that I'm just horrible at. So, this team building is what I call it, with colleagues and friends across the industry. It's in today's world, it means more than ever. It really does, because the lack
Yeah,
of
and with
experience out there is we're losing people monthly. So
yeah, it blows my mind. Like I think I've said it a couple times on the podcast, how many welders and inspectors we're losing, over the next 5 years or whatever. But when they broke it down to a percentage, that's when the light bulb really went off. I was like, holy shit, 50% of the workforce over the next 5 to 6 years is leaving. That's insane. And then the demand is growing. Even if we had, if those people weren't leaving, we would have, the demand is still continuing to grow,
it is.
which just blows my mind. Like, where are we going to find all these people?
It is, but the weird thing about the dynamics is what I've seen is the workforce that we had, they would just put brute force at something to get things done, and the workforce that we have currently, the below 30 or just above 30-year-old class and below, they work differently. So I think companies and industry are going to have to really shift their gears to be able to maximize their performance. You're not going to be able to do it like we've always done it.
No, but I think we've got a lot more things like technology at our disposal that we didn't have growing up. I mean, there's just so many different things as you talk about automation. You get robotics. I mean, even the software that you and I have been talking about back and forth, C-Spec, getting C-Spec. I mean, like, I've been typing WPSs up on Microsoft Excel for the past since I got my CWI, and it's like I'm beating my head against the wall. But with C-Spec, I'll be able to crank out a WPS instead of in within like 6-10 minutes versus 5, 6, 7 hours sometimes.
I'll tell you, man, my heart goes out to y'all hardcore guys that believe you got to do it that way. And it's, when I've had many conversations in ASME Code Weeks with Mike Bernasak, the owner of that program, and he said, look, my intent was never to make a program that would do an engineer's job. My intent was to make the engineer's job more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
That was all his intent ever was. And some people are of the opinion out there that they need to buy these softwares to replace a person, and that's not the case. It's not the expertise part of it anyway.
Right.
If you can speed up what you're doing, time is money. One thing you can't buy back is time. So if you can save time, you're making money, and so is your customer, because you're getting what they need faster, so then they can test welders and then get welds going in production faster, and everybody wins, right?
Yeah, it's all about efficiency. Like, I used to tell people, they'd call me up and they're like, "Hey, I need a pre-qualified WPS for this, that, and everything." I'd be like, okay, give me like 72 hours, 3 business days, whatever. Let me go through. Let me do all the research and stuff like that. But it seems like C-Spec's just going to help. Like, I know what I need to put in there, but it's the verification of everything that I put in there. I don't want it to be wrong. The last thing I want to do is send something to a customer or a client, and they're like, "Man, this is exactly what we needed," and then they forward it to the engineer, and they're like, "Nope, this is wrong. This is wrong. Fix that." I've had that happen to me before, and it's like, damn, like, it was on, it was in a footnote, or it was on the next page.
Yeah.
So this is just going to make me more efficient, and it's going to another cover your ass type, software.
Yeah, he's got things on there like the code checker, and you can turn it off, or you can leave it on, and it'll flash up on the screen if you're trying to do something that may be violating code, or it'll tell you to go read a specific paragraph to ensure that you're not going to violate code.
Right.
So it's very helpful. And Mike, what I like about Mike is he's one of the few people that own a welding software like that actually, if not is a member of every code committee that the software is able to write, but if he's not a voting member, he attends the code committee meetings. So he has the most code correct software on the market, in my opinion. And he keeps up with that, and he's pretty religious about making sure he's got it all ready to go, and even with the updates, so
Yeah.
it works.
I know
really
you
well.
and I've been talking about it since I think when I came down there for the welding competition that one year, a couple years ago. Yeah. We were talking about it. You're like, "You running them off Microsoft Excel?" He's like, "Hell no, you need to get this program here." So it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I've been using it since 2000, and before that, it was DOS-based software. It was horrible.
Oh, geez.
And
//
it was horrible. And then we had gotten to some jobs we were doing welding procedures for European directives or specifications, and we called Mike up, and he had already, his software was compatible. All you did was just click a button on his software, and it went from ASME to the European standards, and even all the information was put in millimeters and instead of inches, and all the data was convertible, and it was just so quick, where that would have taken me literally weeks to read and do all those things. I did what I needed to do in a day or two,
Mhm.
And it was just quicker. And again, the clients most times today, they don't care as much as it costs, as long as they can get it when they want it.
Yeah, how fast can you get it to me? That's always the biggest thing. I get calls, "Hey, man, I need to test, a couple of my guys." "Okay, how soon do you need to test them? Can I send them over there today?" "Shit, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon." "Yeah, I suppose." Send them on.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's how it happens. So no, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, brother.
No, I was gonna say, like, how long have you been testing welders?
I started welding, I guess, when I was about 13 years old with my dad. Took metal trades in high school, so I was pretty proficient when I graduated high school as a welder. But in the demographic area where we were at, it was a lot of oil field and pipeline. So I didn't know what heliarc was or TIG welding. I mean, squirt guns, MIG guns, no problem, flux core. But I was primarily a stick welder. So I started going to Lee College in Baytown to get a 2-year degree in welding technology, and I was going to learn the other processes and things. And I got a shot in 1997. Owner of a lab called up there and talked to the dean of the welding side of the college and asked him if there was any candidates that could be good floor inspectors. So I've been testing welders since October 16th of 1997.
Damn, you know
And
the date and year.
I'll never forget that date. It was a very interesting date. Uh, I was on a pipeline down in Corpus Christi, man. It was one of the last hydrogen pipelines that was welded in the state of Texas, and there's less than 1,000 miles of hydrogen pipelines, and it was going from Three Rivers, Texas, to Corn Products Road in Corpus, and it was an old 8-inch crude line that Koch Pipeline had in the 50s, and they had condemned it. Another company, I think it was Air Products or Air Liquide, bought it, and we revamped the line for hydrogen service. And man, it was muddy, wet, raining. It was the worst job in the world because it was an old, crappy pipeline. And that dude called me up and said, "Hey, you want a job?" And I was like, "Yep, I sure do. I'm
Oh,
coming
yeah.
home." and that and I didn't figure I'd stay there very long, maybe 5 or 6 months. And it just the business suited me, and I enjoyed the work, and just you learn more about welding when you get to destroy welds. I wish every person in the welding industry could work in a lab for at least a month so they could see what happens when you do it right or what happens when you do it wrong, and it's so detrimental to your career as far as you understanding what actually needs to happen more so than people that just are in the industry and they see a weld, from the surface all the time, you know. But no, it's been since 1997, man. I've been testing welders. I don't know how many welders I've tested. God, since then, over 100,000. Probably 200,000 or 300,000 weld tests. Different, because most welders take 2 or 3 pipe tests a piece. So, that's at least 4 tests per welder. Over 100,000 welders. That's over 400,000 or 500,000 weld tests since 1997, and welding procedures over 20,000 that we've qualified and I've been a part of, helping clients produce or put together and consult with them on what filler metals to use or what welding techniques or welding processes and whatnot. So it's been a fun ride, man. It's been a fun
Damn. Now,
ride.
when you started, you said floor inspections. Exactly what is that? I mean, like, you're just doing
Well,
destructive testing on welds?
I was hired just to basically do visuals, like, on the floor. So when the guys got their tax in the coupon, have the WPS in your hand, make sure that they, can read and understand the WPS, set them up in their booth, get them started to the prescribed test that the clients want to give them. Most of the time, the client inspectors were there, so you're working side by side with the client inspectors, and then just administering the test. Just telling them, giving them the hold points. You put the tax in, that's a hold point. You get the root pass in, that's a hold point. I always like to see the root pass after the hot pass, and then they kind of let them go on the fill and cap, but just keep an eye on them and not sit there and bird dog a welder. A welder, when you start hanging around somebody's shoulders, they get nervous, and welders
Yeah,
are
they're
pretty
nervous
nervous
as it
enough.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've always tried to just leave them alone and just kind of stay out in the shadows and just keep an eye on things. And if things don't look right or something looks like it's not going right, just walk up there with a smile and say, "Hey, man, you doing okay? I see you're struggling, or what are you having issues with? Do you need something? And just try to work with them. I mean, you don't want to be a QC policeman, but you want to be somebody that you've got a job to do. You've got to grade a weld according to whatever code or client standards that are in place, and they got to make the weld. So it's not your job to teach them; it's your job to evaluate them. And if they have questions, help them answer those questions so they can be successful. And at the end of the day, if they can't, well, then they don't get a job. And it doesn't always work out. I mean, I think back in the day, we were probably running a 40% reject rate visually in a test lab. Today, it's probably closer to 60%. And if you have a test lab that has less than 50, 60% reject rate, they're not doing their job. They're letting the saw shop and the bends or the x-ray decide whether the weld is good or not, and they don't know what they're doing visually. And that's the problem with most inspectors today, is they let something else, another form of NDE or volumetric inspection or destructive testing, dictate whether the weld's good or not. And they don't do their job as far as what they're, the main part of their job is 99% of that job is VT. Do the VT. If it's not where it needs to be, you don't go further.
Right.
Most people, they overlook that in the code.
Yeah, no, it's got to pass visual. First, I had just had that experience just this week. I had a guy, he sent 3 welders down. I tested all 3 welders, and 2 out of 3 passed visual. So I told him, hey, I'll have your stuff by the end of this week. The whole deal. And then I called up the guy that was paying for the test. I was like, hey, just to give you a heads up, 2 of them passed visual. I'm going to take those. I'll bend them. I'll have your results by close of business Friday. However, one of your welders did not pass visual. Just want you to know, because he's paying for the test. He needs to make plans based off of who's going to be able to go out in the field and weld and stuff.
Yep.
So he's like, he's like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. He's like, that guy, he was already certified and everything, and he had the card and this, that, and the other thing, and his cert just lapsed. Like, can you send me some pictures of the weld? So I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. I sent him pictures, and he goes, yeah, it doesn't look good, but I'm pretty sure it's strong. And so I sent back. I said, yeah, but exactly. I was kind of chuckling as I'm reading it. I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't pass visual, so it doesn't go to the bend. And I've had that conversation with other, people that, they're like, well, can you bend it anyway? I can, but I'm going to let you know right now, if I bend it and it's a clean bend, you're still not getting a cert because it doesn't pass visual. It has to pass visual or it doesn't go to bend. And it's very difficult for people to understand that. And then another big misconception is on plate tests. They're like, well, you don't inspect the first and the last inch, right? And I was like, no, every bit of it gets inspected. It does. That part doesn't. And I think what throws a lot of people off is in the code books, it says, this piece is going to be disregarded. When you go to prep it for, cutting and bending and all that stuff. These parts are going to be discarded. Well, yeah, they're going to be discarded after visual. So the whole plate, that whole linear section has to meet visual. If it does not, it doesn't. You don't disregard anything. That whole plate gets. The only thing you disregard is the run on and run off tabs. Yeah. Other than that, that actual weld, it gets inspected, the whole thing.
Well, it's like ASME. They for qualification for welder, it's 6 linear inches, whether it's pipe or plate. So at a minimum, 6 inches of weld have to be visually inspected. Now, if the plate's 8 inches long, like we cut our materials like 7 inches. So that leaves a half inch on each end for runoff for start and stop, right? So I don't inspect the last half inch, but the 6 inches get inspected. And I think D11 up to, from like, I don't know, up to 1 inch is 7 inches as well. and then you can do 6-inch on the 1-inch thick plates, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, but if you read the code book, like you said, either make your coupons slightly longer so you can do the inspection, or put runoff tabs. Even like when we do plate quals with backing bars, we make our backing bars 8 or 9 inches long, so the welders have a built-in runoff tab. And most welders don't understand or know that, because as an industry, we do such a poor job explaining what the actual code says, or the WPS, and I wish schools would do a better job of explaining to their students about those things. But the misconception is most schools don't have people with that expertise to teach that stuff to them. A lot of them don't. Some do. And it's such a detrimental part. I mean, we get guys that come into the lab that have been welding for 20 years. They don't even know how to read a WPS. And shame on the companies they've worked for the last 20 years, And they definitely don't know what code says, And it's, I've always been a proponent when we're testing welders. I always ask the welders, do you have any questions? Do you have any questions about the code? Do you want me to explain it to you? Because the more they know, the more informed they are, the better of a welder they'll be. If they pick up tidbits along the way, that'll help them down the road improve their skill set to help the next person, get a weld in a production, arena that'll give them what they're looking for. A lot of times, like design engineers that are designing systems, piping systems, pressure vessels, equipment, turbines, stuff like that, all kinds of stuff. They assume everybody always underestimates the welding. They're like, well, we're just going to weld it. It'll be fine. Man, the welding is the most detrimental part of the whole component, because that'll make or break the whole component. But we never put enough emphasis or importance on the welding. We just assume, oh, well, they're just going to give it to a qualified welder, and he's just going to make a perfect weld every time, and he's not a human being, and he never has a bad day, and, it's just going to be fine. Not the case. Most welders, I like to tell people, welders have a duty cycle like a welding machine, especially, as people. They're not 100% of the time. They got like a 60% duty cycle. And you're probably going to get the best 100% out of them early in the morning. Beyond that, their skill set starts to fall off. And you need to understand that as an inspector, because you'll see it like when you're testing guys and they're there for 6 or 7, 8 hours, especially last summer when it was 110 degrees in the shade in Houston. Man, we sit there and tell these guys, we're giving out cases of water, just trying to keep them from overheating and passing out on us while they're taking a test. And because they don't know how to pace themselves. Well, if that guy can barely stay coherent just to stand there in the shop because it's so hot, he sure as hell ain't going to be good at what he's doing. His welding's going to fall off. And, you've got to take all those things into consideration. So, and you could be the opposite in a cold environment. It could be so cold the guy could care less if he makes a sound weld or not. So all those things need to be taken into consideration. I tell people a lot of time when we're testing welders, I always ask them, where's the guy going? What are y'all doing? What kind of work are you doing? Are you working in a tower, in a pressure vessel, in a reactor, in a coke drum? Are you in a furnace? Are you in a boiler? What are y'all doing? Are you just welding structure out there, in a yard? Hell, I don't know if you know this, but the big thing right now is this rope access welding inspection and NDT. Everybody, all these NDE companies now have rope access employees. Well, now these crazy son of a guns are starting to do rope access welding. So you mean to tell me if a guy can barely make a test standing on his 2 feet in a booth, how in the hell is he going to be successful swinging from a rope 150 feet in the air?
No shit.
But if you Google that, several of the big service providers out there, they claim to have rope access welding services. It's a thing now.
Damn.
Don't build a scaffold. We'll just send a crazy guy up there on a rope while he's welding.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't see I don't see that being a good idea, but we don't have to put $100,000 worth of scaffolding up,
Damn. I mean, it's better to put the scaffolding up there because you want to set up the ideal environment for the welder. Like you were saying, everybody's like, oh yeah, just weld it. And they don't understand what goes into it when they say just weld it, or we're gonna slap them together. The welder will come in here, he'll do his magic, and then we're off to the next one. Well, sometimes his freaking magic wand's broke, and or he's got shitty conditions. He can't get access to where he needs to be. And like you said, you can do it standing upright in a welding booth with perfect conditions. I mean, I've got air conditioning in my shop, but if he could do it in there, he should be able to do it hanging off a rope 150 foot in the air. No, that's a completely different environment for them. So I really like what you guys do at Republic, as far as you guys do a lot of different mock-ups. I mean, you were doing like a high pressure water line last year. So you had like a freaking generator set up, and you got like this water pump set up. And I mean, you're pushing water through the line as they're trying to do this test, because that's the reality that they're going to face when they get out in the field. Or when you were doing the one where it had to be, you were telling me the story, I think when I was in Texas last time, about how you guys had to do like hot dye penetrant testing, because everything it says, well, according to the WPS or whatever, we have to maintain an internal inner pass temperature of 450 degrees, but you also have to do a dye penetrant test in between passes. Well, how the hell do you do that when like dye penetrant's got a limited, temperature that you can't go above, and for it to be effective. So you got to just continuously spray it on there. But now you're like chilling the freaking weld off.
and they make a high temperature PT. I think it's good up to 600 degrees. But when you spray that cleaner on there, son, the flames are awesome. Like, they're everywhere. But I mean, is it a perfect method? No. Is it a method? Yes. Can you use that for a final inspection? Of course not. You've got to use some sort of volumetric type stuff. I mean, I've got a good friend of mine, Dave Bajula. He's one of the sharpest NDT guys I've ever met. He's past president of AS&T, and he's one of the guys that developed phased array ultrasonics up to like 800 degrees in service. So, of course, the man can't do that, but they put the guys in foil suits, and they'll peel back, insulation off a reactor or a piece of equipment, and they'll put the bug on there, and they're actually doing it as the unit is in operation. And what he's found with a lot of his results, normally we do those methods at room temperature, at ambient temperature. Well, when you're doing them at temperature, at operating temperature, the material's doing different things. So the results that he's got is amazing, because the clients eat that up, because now they know what their equipment's doing in service, where they don't get to see that style result when it's at ambient temperature and it's not running. So, I mean, there's lots of different methods out there, and we're pretty big about pushing the envelope if customers are willing to take the plunge and not per se challenge code or industry. There's so many different technologies out there that are changing the industry. Hell, last year we had some guys from Canada come down, and they had an Olympus ultrasonics probe on a drone. And
I saw that. That was cool.
Yeah. Well, he crashed that drone like the third day. He killed one. I mean, that thing, the wind took it. We had like a 40-mile-an-hour wind, and that thing flipped over in the parking lot and busted into 1,000 pieces. But I was talking to him the other day, and when they showed the equipment to us, they could only hit something at a 90-degree angle where they were testing horizontal. Well, they've since developed the technique. Now they can do it in any direction. It can shoot straight down, up, left, right. I mean, so you're starting to see things like that now become more of a viable resource for in-service inspections and stuff where they can. But, I mean, it's funny because welding is still the one process that is still lagging behind, because in a lot of repair situations, automation still doesn't work. We still have to do that the way we've done it for the last 40 years. Manual TIG, manual stick, if we can use some semi-automatic flux core MIG, possibly. We're starting to see companies trying to use track equipment and automated equipment to make bigger welds repair situations. But it's like when you have a crack in a piece of equipment, a crack doesn't run straight. It may go 2 or 3 different directions, and that's where automation kind of stops. And then you're grabbing that guy and asking him to use his ability and his experience to finish the job. So, um, you know, I'm a big proponent of stressing to people that experience is the key to education. You know, you can read things in a book all you want, but until you put your hands on it and you feel it and you touch it, especially in inspections, the more situations you see and the more industries that you see, the better of an inspector you'll become. You know, there's like 4 or 5 or 6 different levels of welding inspectors, in my opinion. You got the guys that just have an NDE background that are really good with all the NDE methods. And yeah, they can do VT. They're okay. And then you've got guys that have 20, 30 years of welding experience that finally get a certification or, some sort, and they start welding inspection, and they do really well with that as well. And when there's a problem, that's the guy they're calling to help come up with a solution to fix it. And then you've got guys that may never really even look at welds, that are doing inspections. So there's several type of forks in the road you can take as an inspector, in this industry. You may just look at structural fabrication your whole life. At IEC in Austin last year, when me and you were together, I was amazed at all the structural people, with the AISC and all that. And man, those guys, they know more about structural stuff than I'll ever know. That is what they do. And I was joking with a couple of them, and I'm like, man, I just deal with the O-beam, not the straight beam. I'm an O-beam guy. If it ain't got a hole in the middle and it ain't round, I'm not your guy, And they were laughing, and we were having some good jokes at the bar that one evening, drinking some adult beverages. But, it's crazy because, it's like where you're at in Orlando, a lot of structural, a lot of commercial, not industrial, and staircases, handrails, commercial buildings. Man, that's a whole nother world too. And yeah, there you may see some piping and mechanical, like chill water and things of that nature, maybe a boiler in a building somewhere for temperature or for heat, or in a hospital or something. But it's the pipe welding there is very minute and small, where the structural, over it's just bigger situations. So it's pretty impressive that, we're very fortunate. I've been able to see a lot of different things in inspection, which has made me a better inspector, a better welding person, because I've gotten to see different industries, sheet metal, aerospace, oil and gas, whether it's upstream, downstream, midstream, structural fabrications, man, power, fossil power is another big one. You've got a lot of chromes and alloys and things that we didn't have in oil and gas for years. And it's funny, a lot of the alloys they've been using in power plants for 30, 40 years are now spilling over into the oil and gas industry, and then the oil and gas people put their spin on requirements of them. So it's a lot to keep up with, and trying to maintain the knowledge base to not fall behind. It's hard, man, because these codes and these standards are changing just about every 2 or 3 years.
And none of them are in sync with one another. You get, ASME comes out on a different schedule, API comes out on a different schedule, all the different D11s come out, or all the different D1s come out on a different schedule. So like by the time you get really used to working at this code book, they go and change it. And it's not usually a massive change, but now you have to start referencing that specific code. So, you set the other one on the bookshelf, and then you go back, start familiarizing yourself with a new one. And by the time you get familiarized with that one, because you're working in so many different codes, that one expires, and then another one expires. You just got to keep bouncing around with it, and you just can't know it all. And that's why I tell people I don't quote the code book unless I have it in front of me and I can flip to the page and read it right there to you.
Yeah, no, that's because of the changes that are made. That's the best way. Trust but verify. The code committees, even in ASME, don't talk as much as they should. Sometimes there's a lot of overlap where you may have a construction code doing something and the qualification people or the materials people don't know that the construction code's making a change, and it could be a massive change that affects everybody. And sometimes they got to go back and undo it. That happens as well. There are oversight committees to try to keep that from happening, but it still happens. We were at the API 582 meeting a couple months back, and which is a recommended practice for the oil and gas industry for just welding in general. And that book, the latest edition, came out last year, and it doubled in size. And the new edition we're working on, we got 4 years to make all the changes. But believe it or not, that 4 years comes pretty quick. And what you try to do is not wait till the last 12 months to try to get things pushed through, because then you wind up just not getting it done. But it's my hat off to all those people on those code committees, because I do what I can. I attend most all of them, the APIs, the ASMEs. I'm not even going to deal with the AWS stuff. That's just too much. But between API and ASME, I got my hands full. But we're on task groups for some of the committees and stuff like that, and some of them I refuse to even really get involved, just because it's too much. It's almost a full-time job, and the people that sit on those, that have the voting rights to sit on those committees, I have the utmost respect for them, because it's a full-time job outside of their full-time job,
Right?
And they put their heart and soul into it, and they're very prideful people, and they deserve that, because it's not an easy or a fun process. Sometimes they'll argue for hours about where a period or a comma should go. And believe it or not, if you put it in the wrong place, it changes the whole outlook of the intent. And it's crazy, but those things have to be there, in place, and it helps us, not, it's all there to keep us safe, so we all make good decisions, But
I mean, we live in a litigious society, and so like if you got the comma in the wrong spot, period in the wrong spot, or just the verbiage of how that's written, because a lot of it's subject to interpretation, and you're certified to interpret it. They've given you authorization to interpret these specific documents a certain way. Well, if you misconstrue that information, we're like, well, that's not how we wrote it. Well, that's what I interpreted. So you can't have that confusion right there. That water can't be too muddy, because it all goes back to litigation. A weld fails, a building collapses, a pipeline bursts, or something like that. All that's going into, it's going to become exhibits, at that court appearance.
Yep. And it ain't a matter if, it's when. In today's world, with the lack of experience that's on these job sites or in these fabrication facilities, or especially in the industrial side of the welding business, you're starting to see a lot more mistakes being made because of our experience level, with all the crafts people out there on a project, and people are getting hurt, people are dying. I think sometimes on the internet, people don't emphasize how dangerous welding can be, in our industry can be. There's a reason why people in our industry make so much money. It's called hazard pay, because you may not come home, So I think a lot of times, because we've been so fortunate as an industry in the last 40 years, the track record's been pretty good as far as safety, because we had a lot of experienced people out there to keep themselves from getting hurt. Common sense. What we have now is a huge influx of young people getting into the industry, and they don't know what is safe and what's not. And we've had several documented fatalities, near misses, just this year alone, and we're only 3 months into it. And what that is going to cause is, my fear is, more government oversight and safety and code oversight, and then things will get more expensive to build here in this country, and that'll push our industry to other countries where it's cheaper, where they don't have that government oversight. When you go to Southeast Asia and they're building these modules for these billion-dollar LNG facilities, Do you really think they have government oversight in OSHA like we have here? No, man. They don't have to wear the PPE. They don't have all the safety precautions and things they have to do. So, of course, it's cheaper to build things over there. And then just bring them over here and install them. And if we're not careful as an industry, we're going to put ourselves in a bind. Like if you go to Europe and you see things, there's very little industrial construction that goes on in Europe. Why? Because of oversight and governments, having their hands in it. The cost, it just costs too much. So a lot of these things just aren't done there. And the United States we're slowly going down that road, and it's our industry's changing, and it's going to cause big changes down the road. I mean, everybody complains that, our labor costs are the most expensive thing on a project, and they're right. It is, but safety and quality will drive that cost up as well if you're not careful. The more issues that we have, the more you're going to see that start driving the cost of these projects. The less projects you'll see here, and you'll see our industry really suffer from that in the future.
And I think a lot of that comes down to education. That's why I'm a huge proponent of like apprenticeships, because you're actually working in the field that you're studying. So you get to work during the day, you get to go to class at night, you're getting the best of both worlds. But a lot of times what ends up happening is we've got this massive shortage. There's wait lists at pretty much every welding school you want to get into, and they're trying to crank them out faster and cheaper, but not better. Better's like, that's an afterthought, because most people that, they oversee a welding program, especially in like the collegiate side of things, they're like, oh, it's welding. These are the kids that, they couldn't make it into school, so they're not the smart ones, so it must be easy. I had an administrator tell me, like, why are you using so many welding rods per day? I was like, what are you talking about? We got 15 students. We're burning 50-pound can of rods in a day. That's not bad. For a rod with an electrode efficiency of, what is it, 50 to 60 pounds per hour, or 5 to 6 pounds per hour, yep, roughly. I mean, that's not too bad. They're like, well, why can't you just give them like 3 or 4 rods and, let them run that for a day? And I'm like, you obviously have no idea what it takes to do this. And then he goes, I want you to teach me how to weld. That way, if you're not here for a day, I can just fill in for you. Okay. Yeah. Do you have 20 years? Can you? It's like, we don't have enough time. We don't have enough time in the day. But I think that's the problem is, even, especially with a lot of these schools, welding is kind of an afterthought. So they don't put a whole lot of money into the welding schools to be able to train them and skill them up. So they come out of welding school and they may have a cert or two, but it's done in the perfect conditions. They've never welded longer than 4 or 6 inches. They haven't done a 24-inch run on anything. Most of the time, they're not doing anything thicker than 3/8 of an inch. They're not doing it on a scaffold or from a ladder or from an articulating man lift or any of this stuff. Like, they don't have any idea what the job actually is going to consist of, what the work environments look like. What are some of the problems we're going to run into while we're in the job site? Team building, working with other people. You're in that booth all by yourself, and all of a sudden you're working with a 6-man crew. You don't get to experience a lot of this stuff. And I think we're doing a disservice to our industry across the board when it comes to all of the different skilled trades, because we don't have apprenticeships set up in this country.
Well,
and there's no standard. If I went to a welding school out in, Houston, Texas, I'd get a completely different education than I would in Orlando, Florida. I'd get a completely different education, in Los Angeles, California. I'd get something completely different in Chicago. No matter where you go, everybody's got a different welding program. There's no standard to say, this is what needs to be taught for this industry. Like electrician, you could be an electrician in all 50 states and like they have a specific standard. But because welding, we have so many different alloys, so many different material things, all the essential variables, there's so many of them, you have to get it by experience. So there's not like one test you can take to rule them all. You can't just go in and take a 6-inch pipe test in 6G position and like, oh yeah, you're certified for every process, every position, every material thickness. It doesn't happen. You develop, you've got 20,000 WPSs under your belt or better. Those are for all specific applications because nothing's ever the same. How do you train and prepare somebody for that industry?
And that's the thing. You can't do it. Like the unions we have here in the country to get somebody up to a journeyman status, I think if you called one of the local, union halls, they're at like 3 years for an apprentice. 3 years before they call them a journeyman.
Yeah.
Up to that point, you're just an apprentice or a helper or whatever you want to call it. And for these non-unionized welding schools out there to sit there and say the misconception is, well, we're better than the union, so if you give us 6 weeks, we're going to give you a career.
Shit.
Man, come on. In 6 weeks, you've not even burned 50 pounds of rods as an individual.
Nope.
When you burn 5,000 pounds of rods, come see me. And the same thing with inspection. Yeah, I mean, we're so good at pushing inspectors. Well, we got this 4-day class, and then we'll give you a CWI exam. Yeah, okay, go ahead. Now what we have in this industry is probably, I'd say 40%, a strong 35% of the certified welding inspectors that are in the United States, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but they're not qualified. I'm not arguing that they couldn't pass a test, but they're not qualified to do their job. I've seen it time and time again. They don't have any welding experience. We don't screen these people prior to, taking an exam. And it's the same thing with welders. I see it all the time. People send welders to the lab. Half the guys don't even know what they're doing because the person they talked to on the phone, they were just an HR person.
Didn't know what they were asking for.
They barely knew where the guy was going or where the job was. Most guys show up and they're like, what am I doing? And I love this one. Well, that ain't what they told me I was doing.
Yeah.
Well, QC guy standing right over there, you go talk to him, man. If you don't want to take the test, somebody else will hire you.
Yeah.
We see that a lot. And there's, like you said, there's such a big misconception of all these things. It's hard. It takes years. And it's like I tell people, if I'm out there working in a refinery or a chemical plant or a power plant or in a big fabrication shop, I don't want somebody beside me with less than 5 years experience. If I got my hood down or I'm busy doing an inspection, crawling around on a pressure vessel, I don't want somebody like that around me because I don't want them to kill me. I want to go home at the end of the day. I want somebody that has the equal amount of 10, 15 years experience that I know will give, that won't do something ignorant to get us both hurt, And that's part of the big problem too. Like you said, the problem with our system is in the United States for education is it's broke, and it's not unionized to the point. You go to Europe. I've got some colleagues from Europe, and they kind of find out pretty quick when you're in grade school, junior high, whether you're college material or not. If you're not, they don't put you in the same classes. They start directing you to more technical classes to an apprenticeship program. And whatever it is industry that you choose to be an apprentice in, by the time you get out of school, you actually know what you're doing. You know more. Some of the guys that I've met from Austria and Germany, they're welding guys. They know more about metallurgy than most metallurgists. And I'm like, man, where'd you pick all that up? Learn it in school. I couldn't be a welder if I didn't know this. Man, my hat off to you, because they know their stuff. And I wish, like you said, we did a better job here in the U.S. doing that. But the problem is our government doesn't mandate things better because politicians that are voted in for things aren't experts. And unfortunately, we rely on them to, hire people to drive things. And I think that's the failure. It's like even with these, community colleges. You got a dean over the welding. Most of them don't even know what welding is. Well, they know when you look at it, it's real bright. It'll burn your eyes. Outside of that, they don't have a clue. But they passed the academia part. Therefore, they met the qualification. And, well, you can just be in charge of the welding thing, too. It'll be fine. They take it for granted. And that's the biggest disrespect of our industry that we have is so many people are in it that aren't qualified to be in it. And it really makes our job even harder because we've got to deal with these people making bad decisions. A lot of times they make bad decisions and welds don't, pan out right, or you have premature failures, sometimes fatalities or accidents. And uh, I unfortunately, I think in the future we're going to see more of this. It's just going to become more apparent, and it's unfortunate because in a country where uh, the bad that you do way overshadows the good. You can have 100 good welds, but boy, you make one bad weld, and you're the worst welder in the world, or the
That's the
worst
one.
inspector. And man, how about we look at the average, and the time span, and look at it from a percentage basis. A lot of times we don't. They always tell the welding guys and the inspectors, "Oh, you're only as good as your last job." Well, what about the last 40 years? That's irrelevant. Come on, you know. But it's interesting, man. And when I was a kid getting into the business, I had an idea that I wanted to be in the welding business. I figured I'd be a welder. I never considered inspection as a trade for myself, um, because when I was growing up, you didn't have an opportunity to be an inspector unless you were welding for 20 years. You know, you just didn't see that. It was very rare. Most guys came off their tools. They were pipe fitters, they were welders, boiler makers, uh, before they got into inspection. And if we would just go back to screening people prior to taking a test, we don't want everybody to get a trophy, and I think people get tied up with the money. They start to see the money flow because industry picks up and the need for more people come. So they see the money coming, and then they get cloudy judgment over the money versus what's right and wrong. You know, API. I had an old employee sign up to take one of his API certifications, like 510 or 570 exam, and he had to put me down as a reference. And they send me an email. API does. If I don't respond back to that email and answer that email with exactly what he put down on his application, they will not let him take that test. Because he called me. He called me, and I had, I had some dates misscrewed. I was just trying to answer this email, reply back to it for him so he could get an exam date. And he's like, "Man, they're going to send you another email. There was an issue." I'm like, "Okay." So I had more questions to answer. And if I don't answer them in a manner that they accept, then they don't care how much money he has. He's not taking the exam. So they do a really good job of screening prior to the certification process. I wish AWS was more that way. I wish they had people in Miami that had the expertise to screen applications and say, you know what, this person doesn't meet our criteria. Maybe they shouldn't, be able to take the exam. Not say, well, we're going to let them take the exam, and if they pass it, well then, they'll be a good inspector maybe someday. No, man. No, we don't need any more of that. We don't need that. And I wish they would have a process like API does to where, your references actually get a phone call or they get correspondence, and you don't respond, you don't take a test. Plain and simple. They're really lacking in that. And
So you got to put good references down so you make sure that person answers the phone or responds to that email.
Oh, yeah, I'm telling you. And I've had, because a lot of times that email may go to your junk or your trash folder. And I got guys calling, man, they won't let me take this test. And I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do? Well, I put you down as a reference. Remember, you said I could. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, check your trash emails. And sure enough, man, there's one in there from the American Petroleum Institute. Oh, crap. So, I got to respond to it for them. And but it's a good thing. And one of the guys was complaining about it, and he's like, man, they make this thing so hard. I said, thank God they make it hard, because I don't want everybody doing this. I want the top 10%. It's like the Navy SEALs, man. They don't want every sailor to be a Navy SEAL. They don't want 2% of the sailors to be Navy SEALs. They want the top 1%. I know we can't have that in a perfect world, but at least have the top 20%, uh, and then at best, let those other people, have an apprenticeship program or something. But, again, the biggest problem with an inspector is they don't have welding experience. 90% of them out there, I'll probably, that's extruded, maybe 40, 50% don't have any welding experience. Why are they getting in our industry? I mean, if they can't weld, how are they going to be a good inspector?
Yeah,
They're
I think
not
that
gonna.
was one of the most beneficial things when I took the exam is that I had welding experience. I'd already had like 20 some odd years of welding experience under my belt. So like going through part A, that helped. I mean, that was a huge benefit because I understood how to read welding symbols, the differences in the processes, the difference in the inspection criteria. Like I knew that stuff from being a welder. I know what, porosity is. I know what a discontinuity is. I know what a defect is. Like all that helped. I didn't have to study for, a lot of that stuff. And it
No.
was a huge benefit having hands-on welding experience. And it's even helped me as an inspector when I go in there, when somebody comes in to take a test. Like I know what questions to ask to say, hey, you know what? Today probably isn't the best day for you to hand over your hard-earned money and attempt to take this test because I don't do refunds. And so like maybe today is not the day for you, bud. So like here's what I would like you to do. And like I'll give them instruction and say, hey, as much as I'd love to take your money from you right now, but I want to see you pass. Go home and practice these things, before you come back. Or like, I'll have them warm up, go grab a couple plates, tack it up, get the machine dialed in. If they're struggling, on like a fillet weld, okay, bud, here's what I'm going to need you to do because you're not ready to take this test. Or, when they come in the door, I'm like, have you ever taken one of these tests? Well, no. Do you know what you're getting, do you know what you're getting yourself into? Oh yeah, I'll be fine. And like turns out, survey says they're not.
Yeah. And when it's like I took my CWI when I was 21 years old, Jason. Was I qualified? No. No. I had enough welding experience and I had enough college experience. I mean, I barely made, the requirement, but nobody screened my application. I took my CWI and I passed it. And that was before they had schools to learn how to be a CWI. I actually had guys that were mentoring me, customers that had 20 years experience, and they were educating me, and I was working under their tutelage to become a better inspector. And 6 months after I went into the welder testing business, I had a CWI. But I learned how to read code books. I learned how to read them the wrong way, and then you got to learn to read them the right way. And if I didn't have welding experience at that age, because I started welding when I was 12 or 13 on the ranch, a lot of it was just stick welding. But you learn things about the arc and things that that are much needed. I would have never been able to take that test and pass it at 21. And so many people out there, their pass fail rate is ridiculous, and it's just because they don't have any experience to help answer their questions. And then they'll blame the people I went to this school here and they taught me and I was there for 2 weeks and I didn't learn anything. And then you ask them, well, how much welding experience do you have? Well, none. Well, man, you weren't going to pass anyway. I mean, the percentage of you trying to pass, but the problem is they're getting so good at teaching what's on the exam. This is what you have to know. And I don't know. I don't want a guy that needs to know that. I would be better off just signing up to take the exam and going and failing it on purpose, knowing I'm not going to pass. So at least I have a baseline. Now I have a baseline. I know what I'm not good at. Don't study what you don't know. What you know. Work on what you don't. And so many people, they just think, well, if I just take this class, well, I'll automatically pass this test, and I can go out there and get a job with my buddy Bubba over there, and I'm going to make, $48 an hour, and, I'm going to be an inspector. Yeah, you go get you some of that, man. And you're going to be a bad inspector, and unfortunately, we have a lot of that in the industry. And because, and you'll probably agree to this, not everybody can be a welder.
Yeah.
Probably 1 out of 10. It's probably worse than that now. And I say that actually 1 out of 10 would be a good welder. There's probably 4 or 5 in the mix that'll be able to make a career out of it, but they're not going to be, welding on pressure vessels and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. They'll be your average non-code welders. We got to have those too. Nothing wrong with that. That's a good career. But, you got to have people out there to do the hard stuff. And that's the stuff that a lot of people don't want to do, and that's the top 10%. You don't need a 70%er going out there to weld on a 100% job. It's just not going to work. And you definitely don't want an average inspector out there inspecting that job, because he's going to make calls that are the wrong calls. That could cost the job more money, or the owner, or it could cost time, which is the one thing we never have on these jobs is time. So, it's important that people have the experience to go with certification, and I can't stress that enough. And training is an integral part of experience, because sometimes you may not be able to get a certain type of training. Back in the day when I was a kid, most construction jobs had a training lab set up on site. And if you were a helper out there, a hole watch, you would have an opportunity, 2 days a week to go over there and train, to be a pipe fitter or a welder, or, try to, but you're already working as a helper. And then somewhere along the way, our industry kind of lost its luster, and nobody wanted to get into our business. And it really hurt us. So we've got huge gaps in our age groups, and it's really putting a bind on our situation today, is what we're starting to see more of. I was talking to a colleague the other day that does a lot of expert witness for attorneys and stuff for weld failures and whatnot, and he said, yeah, and unfortunately, Scott, guys like me are going to make a lot of money in the next 20 years, because there's going to be more issues. And a lot of these things will go to litigation, and hopefully more people don't get hurt or die, but the right training is important. When I was going to Lee College, when I was a kid for my welding, I forget what, associate degree in welding technology, there was one instructor out of the 5 that could actually weld. One out of 5. The rest
Sounds
of them,
right.
Yeah, they just had their feet kicked up on a desk in the office, and you'd be out there burning rods, and they wouldn't know what they were doing. And you had guys like me that had already had welding experience, and I just wanted to kind of test out of a class and and get to the next level of where I needed to be. And I'd wind up teaching a lot of the guys in there to weld because the instructor couldn't do it. They'd walk over and see me weld, and they're like, man, you do that pretty good. I'm like, well, yeah, I've been doing it for 5 years already, 6 years, and they just sit there and watch you weld, and then you just tell them what they're doing wrong and let them go. But, it's, as an industry, it's like you said, unfortunately, we're not electricians and, automotive type technicians and stuff like that. And, carpenters, to where it takes 20 years to get good at this. And even after 20 years, you may not be the best or
Still
even
don't know.
average. Yeah. And man, I'll be 49 this year. And, it's been a fun ride so far. And I tell people all the time, I know less about welding today than I thought I knew 20 years ago. Because of the code changes and the new welding processes and the technologies. And somebody asked me the other day, they're like, man, have you ever done something with this automation? I'm like, no. He says, well, what makes you think you're good at it? I said, it's got an arc, right? It's a weld. If it's got an arc, I can fix it. Like, I can figure it out. Now, I may not be able to program the robot arm, but you can bring the programmer in to do that. I just need to tell you what it's doing wrong.
Yeah, I'll tell the programmer what he needs to type into that system.
That's it, right? I mean,
Get it closer.
if it's got an arc, it doesn't matter if it's a MIG, flux core, sub arc, inner shield, or stick, or TIG, or any of those processes. Advanced waveform, pulse. It don't matter. If it's got an arc, and you can listen, you got good ears, you can hear and see, you can figure it out. It's not hard. And hell, welding is still a form of blacksmithing, right? I mean, only we're adding wire to fill up a joint. That's the only difference. It's not hard. It really isn't. I say that after I've been in it all these years.
Near 33 decades of fucking welding experience.
Yeah,
it's not hard.
But man, I still screw up today, and I look at myself and I'm like, I should have known better. What was I doing that for? But because we're human beings, we're predictable, and so you really have to strive to have that mindset that tomorrow I'm going to be better than I was today. When I go to work tomorrow, by God, I'm not going to suck. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to, I'm going to try to be better at this welding stuff or in this inspection stuff and be better at reading these codes or determining what I need to do to help, be a positive influence on the industry, because so many people out there, they just don't know what they're doing. And I tell people all the time, you got kind of two types of people. Either they're ignorant or they're just dumb or they're lazy, maybe three. The ignorant ones can be taught. They're going to do something until they know it's the wrong thing, and then they have a choice to make. Either from that point on, once they've been shown the right way, they can do it the right way, or they can just be lazy, and they can do it the way they always have. And then you've got the ones that are just never going to get it, and that's okay. In Mother Nature, some animals will never be, what they need to be, and they're just not that. We're not all made the same. Thank God, we're all different. But you can be really good in this business if you just apply yourself, and you're not scared to ask questions to the point where you're almost annoying to people. I have people all the time, and they call and ask questions. And man, do you have a minute? Yep, I got a minute. What do you got? And then tomorrow they'll call and ask the same question, and that you start getting to that disrespect level. Because I was told a long time ago, don't ask the same question twice from a mentor. Don't disrespect them. Write it down, what they tell you, remember it, but don't ask them the same question more than once, because then you start disrespecting your resource, and at one point they're going to quit answering their phone. A big thing that I always tell people, and me and you have been in these conversations, is when you have a question about the code or what an inspection technique may be, or what the code actually says, I'll ask you, do you have your code book with you? I can tell you the answer, but if I don't help you find it, you're not going to remember it or retain it.
That's the biggest thing, is knowing where to find it.
Yep. And just start. If you can just get to that starting point, you'll find the finish point. But a lot of people, and then there's some good classes out there, like in ASME. Walt Spurko still teaches the Section 9 class. If you're a novice and you're going to be in the ASME industry, I recommend taking that class, because he teaches you where to start to look for things. By all means, are you going to be an expert when you're done with this? I think it's a 3-day class. No, but you're going to learn basics about where to find things. We had the Code and Update Conference in Austin last year that I was co-chair of with Bill Newell on before we started the IEC Inspection Summit. And man, I'm telling you, the people that came in that we found for speakers to talk about the updates to the code, those conferences like that, little one-day conferences, are so important if you're going to work in this industry, whether you're an inspector, a welder, a welding engineer, or a materials engineer, or a mechanical engineer, because it's so hard to keep up with the changes. And being able just to hear it from a member of the code committee to actually tell you what's going on or what changes are being made, so then you can go back when you have time and find this information. Is you can't replace that, um, and a lot of times with our certifications we need PDH hours anyway, professional development hours, so it's a perfect excuse to get your PDH hours, and we don't charge a lot of times, like a lot of these conferences aren't that expensive, you know for the there you get a lot of bang for your buck,
Oh yeah. It's
and
the
I'm a big
travel, the
proponent of
hotel,
it.
and taking time off work. That's the kick in the nuts right there.
Yes,
But I mean, the
yes.
classes are really affordable. That's
No, they
I got
are.
to attend it last time, the IEC conference. I thought that was awesome. That was the first one I'd ever been to, and my buddy Andy Provost, he took that changes to the code book the day before the conference kicked off, and he said, "Man, you should have been here. That thing was excellent. I mean, there was a lot of good debates and back and forth and questions and answers, and
Yep.
I wish I would have made it to that one, but I came in like I think that afternoon I
That
landed.
afternoon, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. It was a good one, man, and we'll probably do that again. Something like that. It needs to come out like every 3 years, so you let the codes actually have more updates, and then you bring the people in to kind of talk about it, and it works really well. But I'll tell you, man, uh, there's so many things out there that change, and even when we were in that conference that day, there were some things that were done in ASME that I just happened to overlook in the new code book, and man, when I heard some of the changes that were made, I was like, oh man, this is going to be a problem, because so many people are not going to look in the code book and see that, and so having these events where we can go as professionals and learn it, and see it and hear it, and then interact with members of the code committee. Ask them, what was the intent for that change? Why did you all of a sudden say that was okay? And they'll may give you some rationale so you understand it more. You may not agree, but you can understand their intent of a change. And a lot of these code committee meetings are free. Well, they're free to attend, but the hotels and the meals will kill you, and some of the flights.
yeah,
I highly encourage people, if they ever get the opportunity, to attend a code meeting, um, because the insights that you'll learn, other than watching paint dry, because it's a long process, um, it is good to get to hear things from a code committee person's standpoint on why they make changes in the documents. It's helped me greatly over the years, and I'll probably never see myself sitting on many code committee meetings because I'm an impatient person, and sometimes, code changes take years. You think, oh well, there's, we're doing something different. We'll just make a change, and next year it'll go in the new edition of the code. No, man, it goes to a task group and another task group and a committee in between that, and then the main body committee, and they may decide it gets tabled for 2 years. You know, and then you may not see a change for 5 or 6 years.
yeah. It's going to be every 5, 10, 15 because it all happens in increments of 5 for the
Yeah.
most part.
So you better be a patient person if you get involved, because it is a lengthy process. It's like watching snails run. I mean, you may fall asleep, but it's fun, man, and it's good to see and be involved with those things, and even getting involved with the sections, the AWS sections around the country, to try to build mentorships with people. Because what I have seen a lot with a lot of the sections within AWS is we have a lot of older people driving the meetings, and we need to see more younger faces in these meetings. Um,
hmm
you know, Younger people today find it hard to really do face to face or verbal communication, and if you can't communicate verbally as an inspector, you're already not going to be a good inspector. You need to have good people skills and be able to communicate with others well. And so even if I highly recommend young people that are striving to be more involved in the welding industry and be inspectors, whether they're CWIs or AS&Ts or API, is attend those section meetings. Like API, they have meetings. ASME has meetings. AS&T. We just had our joint AS&T AWS meeting. Man, had a blast because you get to run into people that are in the welding business, but they just test the welds at a different side of the business that you're in, right? So, the conversations you can have with those joint meetings are phenomenal, and if you're going to get better at this business, you've got to do those things. And if you're not, you probably don't want to be in the welding business because you're not going to get very far,
Yeah. No, the section meetings are a huge benefit. We just did one down here in Orlando. There's a company called Metalax. I don't know if you've ever heard of this technology, but have you ever heard of Metalax?
No.
So it's a company. I think the company's name is Bonal or Banal, something to that effect. But
Yep.
it's like a component they clamp to a table, and then they send out these like ultrasonic vibrations, so you can actually do real time in process. It prevents all your metal distortion. So as
So
you're
it's like
welding,
cleaning.
because the vibration goes through there, and you can also kind of do like a heat treatment process, post weld heat treatment with this
Form of
thing,
stress
because
relief.
it's
Yeah.
freaking insane how they do this.
Yeah.
And it's all done through like little vibrations, and it's not like anything big where it's going to mess up your puddle or anything like that. It's like an ultrasonic frequency, and so they hook it up to the table, and they'll stress relief the table first.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add your parts to it, you clamp it down, you tack it to the table, whatever, you weld it up. Once you cut your tacks free, like nothing deforms.
Yeah.
It takes all the residual stress out of the material. It's insane. And then apparently the technology's been around for like 40 years. I'd never heard of it.
Well, here you are. I mean, using ultrasonic vibrations to stress relieve for distortion and maybe heat treat. Man, blacksmiths have been doing that with a ball peen hammer for 1,000 years.
That's true.
So now we're just using a different machine to do the same thing, because I find it funny. Nobody wants you to peen a weld anymore. Most welders and inspectors don't even know what peening is, because it's an essential variable in ASME. Whether you peen a weld or you don't peen a weld, because it is a form of heat treat, right? But most people don't know how to peen a weld or why you would peen a weld. They have no idea. And I'd love to see that equipment or that stuff, because, in some situations where you can't heat treat with temperature, that is a heck of an alternative, because it sure beats a guy sitting there with a part, sitting there tapping it with his little ball peen all day long, which is how we used to do things 50 years ago,
Yeah.
before
Especially like casts and stuff like that.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
I'll get you in contact with him. I'll send you his contact information, because I know you're pretty active with the Houston section. I'm sure he'd come out there and do a demo as well, or I'm sure they've got a guy out in that area that would do it.
No, that'd be great. I'd love to see that. And a lot of the members would too, because that, to me, that's a lost art,
And you can actually weld at a lower amperage. That's one of the things I thought was kind of cool, is you can actually turn your heat down and weld and still get the same penetration.
Well, what's probably happening is it's reducing the surface tension in the puddle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually allowing you to not have to have as much energy, amperage, or voltage driving the temperature into the puddle. By doing that, it's reducing surface tension in the molten puddle, and it's probably allowing you to run at a colder rate, which also helps with the distortion. Because you don't have to weld as hot now. Now you can weld, without getting the distortion on the part. So that makes a lot of sense.
Artificially exciting the molecules.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty cool.
But I mean, section meetings have been great, because I mean we've done a bunch of different ones down here in Florida, and like just for people to see, technology and processes and equipment that they don't get to see on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you can be in this industry for 20 years and like be really good at what you do, but you're really limited to everything else that happens outside of this industry. Like I've been in structural steel, architectural, and ornamental for the past 26 years. I don't know a whole lot about pipe. The only pipe I've ever welded is O-beam, and it's usually got a chill ring on the inside, or, it's like handrail or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And at the same token, I know a lot of pipe welders that have never done, a moment connection. They've never spliced an I-beam. So, I mean, it's a different skill set. So to be able to have a section meeting and bring people in and show them, like, here's the different facets of the industry. Here's some of the other cool technology that's going on. You can actually see where you can take that equipment and apply it to what you're doing, because a lot of the equipment's interchangeable. A lot of this technology, you can use it in whatever industry that you're in, but you may not know that it exists because you don't necessarily work in a specific area.
Yeah, agreed. And it's funny how many things out there in our industry were designed for one thing but never worked for that particular application. But people found the application that really sends it into the stratosphere. What it was in its original intent. Look at modified short circuit, STT-RMD, and like CMT technology. That was never designed for pipe. When they designed that software and those programs, that was designed for sheet metal people, welding sheet metal for distortion. How can they weld sheet metal without getting the distortion at a lower amperage voltage per se? It wasn't until the late 90s when some guys with Fluor thought it'd be a good idea to try that on pipe. And I think that was an article that was done in 97 or 98 in the AWS journal, where they had took the technology to the next level. Not only did they figure out that they could run a root pass and carbon pipe, but then they started doing it in alloys like stainless. And because of the process, they started doing it without a backing purge. And I find it funny. You get people nowadays, that technology was, came out hot in the mid 90s. Shoot, man, that was over 25 years ago. And people come out and say, oh man, there's this new process called RMD or STT. And I laugh and I'm like, man, that's not old. That's not new. Yeah. I can show you the article hanging on our wall because our senior welding engineer, Patrick, is one of the guys that holds the patent for doing that.
And I was going to say, the patent was done in the freaking 80s.
It's funny how, sometimes things just take a while to catch. And me and Rick Palaninen, Dr. Palaninen, we got into a great discussion a couple of years back at the second or third welding summit we had in Houston. He was, because where he's from, in Illinois or Indiana,
Peoria, Illinois.
Yeah. Automation is huge. Like they don't know what stick electrodes are, man. They're big on wire and automation, and that's great because they do well with it, right? And he was asking the question in Houston, why don't we do more automation? And I'm like, man, because we're still in the, Jurassic Park era,
the dark ages.
Yeah, I mean, our people, man, they're gonna TIG and stick till they're, it's just not gonna happen. And then, he was. I laughed because he was rubbing it in my nose like a puppy that just peed on the floor, And fast forward like 6 years later, we're talking about doing more automation in petrochem and refining, and he's like, you remember me and you had that conversation, young man? And he's chuckling, and I'm like, yeah, I know, Rick, you were right. You're right. You know what I mean? And but what it took really to push that across the board was COVID, up to the COVID situation, TIG and stick and manual processes were still 99% of our industry. Now it's taken that to start pushing our owner-operators to accept automation as an alternative for these projects. And I'm not going to say it's still successful because they get a lot of pushback from contractors, EPCs, because there's a huge trust factor there. Because it's hard enough to find experienced people to do manual welding. Sometimes it's even harder to train people to utilize those, advanced waveform processes outside of a fab shop scenario. When you're rolling out pipe and you can manipulate materials and stay in the top half of the pipe or the vessel the whole time, automation every time is key. When you get out in the field and you've got to make those welds in a fixed position or a restrictive access position, you still run into issues with maintaining that level of quality because that filler metal's coming fast. You got to do something with it. You've got to have an area big enough to where you can move around what you're welding, not move the part so you can weld. And so automation is slowly starting to pick up in our industry, and it's been a long time coming. It really has.
Are you seeing more clients like switching over to like orbital TIG or any of those applications, or are they still, it's all manual still?
So orbital TIG was really designed for like semiconductor, pharmaceutical, oil, dairy and things like that. And I think it really got its start in the 60s in the nuclear, power industry, where they had to make welds and they couldn't stand there while they were making them because of the situation. And the problem with orbital equipment is the cost. And then there's a lot of training and then upkeep. A lot of those systems that are out there, they're not as robust as you would like, and people are not going to treat them with kit gloves, and they don't last. So you've got a huge upfront investment, and you've got a huge learning curve for training, and you have to have an e-tech on the job to be able to maintain the equipment and keep it running. And if you're going to have one machine, you better buy two, because when one breaks down, you want to keep production welding. So instead of buying one unit for $150,000, now you're spending $300,000. So there's a huge cost up front on that stuff. So automation, as far as that's concerned, is very difficult, still difficult to see in the oil and gas industry, where they look at costs, and they don't, because they haven't had to spend that money traditionally. It's hard for them to justify it now.
It's hard to come off the wallet.
Yes. Not that it doesn't produce a higher quality weld. I think the big misconception with orbital welding is people think it's faster than manual or semi-automatic welding, and it's really not. Because if you speed up the machine, you're going to give up on quality. So, you got to decide why you want that process. Do you want a higher quality weld with lesser people? Do you want to try to go faster than the way you've been doing it? Then you've got to really look at that as a business model and see what works best for you. And you better have, and we go back to the inspectors, they better have experience with orbital equipment too. Everybody involved with that, from the engineers, the mechanic, the owner buy-in, the contractor buy-in, from the project manager on down. If none of those people have experience with that type of stuff, it's going to be an uphill battle. Because when you start having some issues, the first thing they're going to say is, well, we told you that wouldn't work. Let's just go back to doing it the way we've been doing it. Mm-hmm. And you don't want that. So, I tell people all the time, the worst thing you can do with new technology is promote it too soon. And then it gets out there, and then, they start people using it for the wrong reasons, and it starts getting a bad rap. And then everybody out there in the industry is, oh, yeah, we used that and it didn't work. Man, I hate when I hear that.
I got unreal expectations of it.
That's it. I laugh all the time. My partner, Juvie, he's also the president of TIG, and he often finds himself talking people out of utilizing that technology, because 5 minutes into a conversation, it's obvious to him that somebody may not be willing to do what it takes to see it succeed. And he doesn't want to be that guy getting the phone call on a Friday night, hey, your equipment sucks and it's not working. When he'll be like, he'll tell him very kindly and softly, maybe you don't need to look at automation. I don't think you're quite ready, Or this is another one I love, Jason. People want to buy orbital welding machines, but then they still want to cut the pipe and fit the pipe and put it all together with Metabo blades or portabands. Dude, let me tell you, if you're going to use advanced technology like that, you better invest the other $500,000 in buying the cutting and facing equipment, the portable machining tools, so you can properly prep. Because with machine and automation, if the prep is not perfect, you might as well hand weld it. Yeah. And if people aren't willing to spend the rest of that money to get the equipment to do all of it, it's never going to work. And that's what I've found in my 30 plus years of doing stuff, is people, they see something, or you see them walk around FabTech and they're drooling over some new system that somebody has in a booth, and they'll be talking about it. And then they want to go back to their facility, and they want to, They want to do half the job the way they've always done it, and then they think this new technology is going to solve all their problems. And it doesn't. It just makes them worse.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. This segment of the Arc Junkies podcast is brought to you by Everlast Welders. If you're in the market for a new TIG welder, I highly suggest the Everlast 255 EXT with the WC 375 water cooler and cart. You can pick up this entire bundle right now for just $2,500 at everlastwelders.com. I've been running my 255 EXT now for just over 3 years, and it is a solid machine. I love running this thing. Right out of the box, it's super simple to set up and get welding. I'm talking like 35 to 40 minutes, and you're ready to go. That includes building the cart, which is probably the hardest part of the whole assembly process. The machine is super simple to set up and get running. Where else can you get a machine? And it comes with a 5-year warranty. Check out all the specs at everlastwelders.com. And as always, if you buy any machine that comes with a TIG torch, be sure to use Arc Junkies in the comments section and get that free Nova foot pedal and TIG torch upgrade. Everlast Welders. Weld mean, weld green. We're also brought to you by IsoTunes. Are you tired of wrecking a $350 set of Bluetooth headphones with grinding dust? Are you jacking up your volume to drown out the sound of the grinder, plasma cutter, and other shop noise? Then check out IsoTunes. IsoTunes are OSHA and NIOSH approved hearing protection that double as Bluetooth headphones. Now you can listen to your favorite playlist or podcast without tearing up expensive headphones not meant for shop life and still protect your hearing. Trust me, tinnitus due to long-term loud noise exposure is not fun, but hearing protection with IsoTunes is. Check out isotunes.com today and see all the different styles and configurations they have to offer. They also make hearing protection for outdoor shooting sports as well. And as a listener of the Arc Junkies podcast, you can save $10 and get free shipping when you use Arc Junkies 10 in the discount box at checkout. That's isotunes.com. Now let's get back to the show. Yeah, you spent all that money. That's what I was going to say about orbital TIG is the fact that, okay, it's a really cool system, but how does it handle high-low? If you got a shit fit up or you're making a repair, like you have to program all that stuff in there. So is it faster or is it easier to have the welder go out there and, tack everything up, get it fit up? Okay, it's not a perfect fit, but we got to, I love what Paisley says. You got to fuck with the cock you got. Like this is the situation that this is our situation right now. We've got to work with it. We got to push through this thing and figure it out. You can't set a piece of automation equipment up on there because the fit up's not perfect. So, but you have a welder that can adapt every inch that he's going across that pipe. Okay, I got a little bit of high-low here. Okay, the gap's open a little bit wider than I'd like, but I can fill that. Where a machine, you really can't do that in real time. Nope. And if you can, you have to be just as proficient at operating that equipment as you are as a welder. You've got to be a welder to operate that equipment. Like I see that they're starting to incorporate magnetic robot arms for like structural connections. So for doing beam columns and splices and all that stuff, well, that arm's probably, 300-400 pounds. So now you got to hook up rigging. You got to hook up all this stuff. Just weld the damn thing out. You don't have to automate everything just because you can. But if that's the only tool you got in your toolbox, you're going to look at everything as a nail. Like, oh, we spent $150,000 on this orbital TIG welder. Every weld we produce this year has got to be done orbital. No, it doesn't. Use it for what it's good at. Like, know your strengths, know your weaknesses. There's still going to be a place for manual welding.
There always will be, and unfortunately, that's the hardest skill out there to learn and to maintain. It's just like anything. If you don't practice your skill set every day, you lose your skill. And that's even true on the inspection. If you're not out there doing it every day, you're not keeping sharp. Your skill set starts to fall off, and that's a problem that we run into. Is even as like I went back to fatigue in a welder or an inspector, it's like a duty cycle on a welding machine. Not even a welding machine's 100% of the time. So what makes us think that the people performing the duties and inspecting these welds are going to be 100%? It's not practical, and I often see that misconception with industry is they just assume, especially the ones that have no experience, oh, well, it's just easy. That's just easy. It's not hard. Okay. You keep thinking that,
Yeah, we'll see.
And you'll find out real quick. And I think we have a lot of potential out there. There's a lot of young people that want to learn what we have to offer as an industry. But I think we need to be careful in how we give them that information, And to some extent, I really hate the way social media paints this picture with welding that it's easy. Some of the crazy posts we see on LinkedIn, these individuals using these handheld welding lasers, dude, they're out there with no PPE, doing this stuff, making videos and posting it all over the internet, and everybody in the world thinks that that's okay. And then somebody posted a video the other day of them making a handheld laser weld. I think it had an arm on it or something, and they had put a piece of paper like 6 inches above the weld, and as the laser's making the weld, the paper catches on fire. Well, what do you think happens to your skin?
Mm-hmm.
Or anybody that's within a 3 or 4 foot radius of that being done. In the state of Texas, to even have one of those handheld lasers, and the people that sell them don't want to tell you this, you have to register your laser like it's an iridium source, like it's like a radioactive source, because it is.
Oh, really?
If you don't have an RSO officer on staff and you don't register that laser with the state of Texas and you get caught using it, you're going to get fined. And with that and those rules, just with the state of Texas, you have to have an area flagged off in your facility where if anybody walks through that area, it cuts power to that machine like a robot,
Oh, no kidding.
Yes, sir. Because at the end of the day, we don't know how safe or unsafe that equipment is. And the state of Texas have taken a different stance. Now, every state has different rules for those, but the technology is so new, people are just buying them because they see somebody make a weld on the internet. Oh, man, that's cool. That'll save me time. No doubt. I think there's a place for that in our industry in the near future. Mm-hmm. However, unlike an arc, in about 10 or 15 feet, the brightness of the arc dies off, with distance. With a laser, what is the distance? What is a safe distance? I don't want to find out the hard way. I don't want to be too close or within 20 feet of this guy using this thing in a shop and he's swing it over there and just swing it at us by accident and we all get these third-degree burns on us or something crazy. I don't want to be that guy, or that individual. And I think, but if you look at it being done on the internet, you got people doing it without gloves.
Yeah.
What are we teaching?
No safety glasses, no gloves. They got sandals, shorts.
What are we teaching people here, man? Those videos ought to be taken down. We ought to do a better job of policing that stuff, because then we're going to get a young crop of young people out there that think, oh, man, we can do that. That's how we work. And they're going to find out real quick if they get out into in a real welding job, whether it's commercial, industrial, or whatnot. There's safety rules. If you don't have your PPE on, you will get fired, because they don't want to have to call your parents or your wife and tell you that you're not coming home at the end of the day because you were ignorant to the fact, and we need to do a better job of that. And because there's a lot of crazy stuff out there that young people think is okay. And that's a huge misconception,
Yeah. Now, have you used lasers at your shop? Have you done any testing? That's the one thing, because I keep seeing all these videos all over the place, some good, some bad, but I want to test some of this stuff.
We had a client, so believe it or not, Tip TIG has one. So they're utilizing a Tip TIG feeder with a handheld laser. I think the machine came in, but we've been so busy, we haven't had time to play with it. So what you need to do is get with Juvie, and when you come to Houston, maybe y'all can play with it. I don't know, once we get everything set up and whatnot. Because, again, you got to follow the rules, right?
Yeah.
But we've tested some samples that some clients that we had in Houston, they had bought some handheld lasers, and they were trying to compare the strength of the welds to GMAW, they're of short circuit like they're doing now. And we did some testing on aluminum, stainless, and carbon, and man, the welds held up. I mean, it's pretty impressive. Again, the intensity of the laser is what creates the puddle, And then a lot of times, if the material's over a certain thickness, they have to add filler metal in it to fill, to backfill the joint. I mean, again, it's welding. So the only
I was going to
difference
say that would be a critical component. Like if you're going to do an aluminum sample, you definitely want to add filler metal just because autogenous welds on aluminum. I mean, they don't hold up for shit.
no, because base metal doesn't make good filler metal, right? So, but you know, this particular customer builds a lot of cell towers and stuff, so it's a lot of small angle iron lattice work. Very, very, very. It doesn't sound like a lot, but there's a lot of welding in that stuff. And the cool thing about the laser for them, which I thought was interesting, is you've seen people utilize lasers, handheld lasers, to remove oxidation and rust. Well,
Yeah.
on the carbon steel lattice work, part of the intent of them buying the laser is they can turn it into a mode, turn a button and use the rust remove mode, go over the joint, and then turn right around and turn it back into welding mode and go, seconds later, make the weld.
That's what I think is really cool about it, is you could do your base metal prep and then you can get right into the welding on the same machine. You're not screwing around with a grinder. Everything just poof goes up in smoke. You don't have grinding dust all over the shop no more.
And so I agree. I mean, it's like, yeah, I'm an old school guy. I love manual welding, but I'm not ignorant to the fact stuff like that has a place. And there is a time when you're going to see that widely used. I think we need some government oversight, whether it's a state level or government level, to put in some safety precautions in how we utilize the technology.
Well, it's like when the laser pens came out. I mean, they started with some legislation because, people are going to be stupid with it. You're out there and like shining these lights and, helicopters, up in the pilots' faces and stuff like that. I mean, that's not good. I mean, imagine what you could do with one of these actual powerful laser systems that can, you got a cut mode, you got a grind mode, you got a rust removal mode. I mean, like, you really don't know the potential of that machine. You can get on Amazon right now and pick one up for a couple grand and, get it sent over here. Like one of the ladies that just took one of my classes, she bought one. I mean, she's obviously a little bit well-to-do in life because I think the price of her machine was like 17 grand. But the average homeowner can go out and get one if they so choose.
Yeah, and they don't even
and there's no training requirements.
Yeah. No, and I mean, and so at the end of the day, it's funny, if I wanted to go get an iridium source to do X-ray with like the state of Texas, I can't just go buy one, right? Because I don't have the proper licensing and all that. And we almost need to do that for these laser machines, handheld lasers, because you're going to see some fatalities or some dumb stuff happen. It's going to make the national news, and then that'll be the end of that.
Yeah, it's going to get more affordable, and the wrong person's going to get a hold of it and start playing with it and doing some dumb shit.
And it's like that old saying, guns don't kill people, people do. Well, the same thing here. Lasers don't kill people, but people do. You're going to see some stupid stuff happen, and the technology is going to get a bad rap because it was introduced to market too prematurely, and we're not going to be able to use it. It'll be 20 more years before we could really use it at a commercial aspect, because manufacturers were so fast to just push it out to market, and we'll just see what happens. So again, there's some things there that have a lot of promise, and you're starting to see a lot of AI kind of take over, whether it's welding related or inspection related.
That part's scary.
I have mixed feelings. Hang on, I got to turn the light on in here. The sun's going down. But I have mixed feelings about that, Jason, and I think for some things it's probably got its use, and then in other things I think it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
But again, me being old school, and I'm looking at the generation gaps with experience, and I think if you utilize AI in a manner where you can offset some experience until the people have time to get experience, well, then we're probably going to be safer as an industry.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, it's got a lot of benefits. It's got advantages, but there's also disadvantages. Like I when it first came out, I started messing around with that Chat GPT, and I was typing in different commands and prompts, and I was like, you know what, this thing's actually pretty cool, but like how accurate is it? So I said, okay, I typed into it. I was like, write me a D11, a WPS to D11 specifications, material thickness. Like I gave it the whole, here's what I want to weld up. Write me a WPS. And no shit, that thing spit out a WPS within like 30 seconds after I hit enter. It just started cranking it out. And I'm checking it against the code book, and I'm like, it's correct. It's scary. But I mean, that's also a good thing because that's the information people are going to have access to.
Yeah.
But then I'm sure there's some nefarious things that can be done with it as well, which is not going to be good.
No. And I've seen, it's like we're starting to see things already in our industry. I've got a colleague of mine that's saying he claims that he can scan a weld with a device, and it can tell him whether it's acceptable or not, like doing VT, but with your cell phone or a intrinsically safe tablet. And the software that they've had and the AI they've built into it can tell them whether it's acceptable to code or not and spit out a report. Now,
Oh, dang.
I don't know that I believe it, knowing the source of his beta testing. But again, I'm very open to seeing the technology to see where they're at this time, because, I mean, look at our cell phones. We can even measure things with our cell phones already.
Yeah. And you can see if it's level, you can see if it's plumb, you can check measurements.
In 10 more years, we may have an X-ray function in the damn thing. Who knows?
I hope not. I don't want that close to my testicles.
Exactly. But I mean, you think about it, man, it's possibility. It's a big possibility. So, I'm not oblivious to the part, we're evolving. We're evolving as human beings. Our technology is evolving. And it's funny, the welding industry is lagging behind severely. Like we're still dragging our feet. But it's coming. We can't say, well, it's not, that'll never be us. We don't have to worry about that. No, the smart ones are already looking at stuff saying, okay, we can't escape this. How are we going to utilize this technology for our industry in a manner that it'll be beneficial? So we're looking at stuff like that to try to, offset, experience in some forms or fashion. It's like anything. You can never get rid of experience, but can I help the inexperienced perform their job in a manner until they can gain the experience? That's what I'd be after for stuff like that.
Yeah, it's definitely. Use it as a supplement to what you're doing.
Yep, no doubt. And so I'm probably going to be looking at that technology here in the next couple of weeks to see where they're at with it. And it's again, you can't overlook it and say, oh well, that's not going to be us. We don't have to worry about that. I mean, the question is how are you going to, I guess, in the future, train or certify an individual to actually utilize the technology? We laugh, like with advanced ultrasonics, Toft and phased array. As cool as that technology is, we use it in the medical industry every day. But yet when we go out on an industrial job, if you have an inexperienced technician that doesn't know how to utilize that equipment, brother, you're going to have a lot of issues. That process and that technique, that ultrasonic technique, still requires a highly skilled individual to perform that work so they don't misinterpret the data that they see, right? So, and it's been out for 25 years already. And we still struggle with it today. And it's written into our codes and standards for use, but I'm still skeptical of the people that perform the work. For out of every 5 or 6 technicians, probably one of them is really good, and the other 4, I wouldn't want them on my job. So when you start looking at these other technologies that are coming out, again, trust but verify. It's coming. We can't say it's not. So how do we utilize the technology as a positive and it not wind up being a negative,
Yeah. I'd be
But
interested in seeing that. That sounds pretty cool. Just be able to scan a weld and say, yeah, pass, fail. Obviously you got to type in different code parameters because ASME is a little bit different than D11.
yeah,
Section 9 is different than, some of the other sections that ASME has to offer. The inspection criteria is completely different. So, I mean, you get to go in there and select the appropriate code, select the appropriate material. Like, I mean, there's so many variables in there. And it's just like anything else with using a robot or a calculator. Garbage in is going to get garbage out. So if you don't have the right settings set up, so I mean, you got to be proficient with the equipment that you're using. And that was the thing, like when I got into teaching welding, so many other instructors were so afraid of the new technology. They're just stuck in short circuit. And it's like, that we've got other modes of metal transfer. You can get into a spray arc. Check this out. You go to mode 12. That's pulse spray. You can get into precision pulse on
yep,
pulse. But they don't want to touch that because they're afraid of the technology.
yeah,
And you can't be afraid of it because you're going to get left behind. If you don't start adopting some of this stuff, if you're one of those like late adopters or, you're just completely against it. I mean, there's still welding instructors out there right now that will not teach anything other than carbon steel in their program because they're afraid of different alloys, not because of cost, just because they don't know what they're doing with it. They don't know the nuances of, of stainless and aluminum and stuff like that. But you can't be afraid to pull this stuff in. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind. And the people that you're teaching, they're not going to be ready for the industry when they walk out the door.
no,
You're really handicapping people. And that's why, like, when I got into education, like, I knew my strengths and I knew my weaknesses. Like, I was a good stick welder. Like, that's where I made my bread and butter, stick and flux core when I was with the union. And I was not great at aluminum TIG. I'm okay. I mean, I can do it. Same thing with some of the other processes like short circuit MIG. I got that, no problem. But what's this pulse stuff? Let me figure that out. So I went and got training, so I could pass that information off to the students. You've got to keep up with the industry to prepare these people to go out because they're already coming out handicapped as it is. Because you only have them for a short time. You take a lot of people that, they don't know how to use basic hand tools, and in 40 weeks, I got to crank out a certified welder. Like there's a huge skills gap I got to fix. And then once I turn them out in the industry, they're still not ready. I mean, they're as ready as they can be, but use the technology to your advantage. Don't shy away from it. Don't try to put it off. Bring it in, figure it out. Like that's why I'm so like I want to get one of those lasers and I want to play with it, not play with it, but like you know what I mean, like actual
yeah,
perform some testing, run the stuff, do some guided bend tests, do some fillet web break tests, cut etches, and see what this stuff's all about. It's fascinating because I see all this stuff on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I was like, okay, it looks good, but as well as I do, how many welders have you tested to where you're like, damn, that's a good looking weld, and then you cut it open and you prep it and you bend it, and it doesn't bend for shit.
yep,
It probably happens quite a bit, but then you get some ugly welds that I mean, it passes, it meets it meets the basic criteria,
yep.
and it bends clean.
Yeah, and I mean that's
So
because they
that's why I
ground
want
their
to
way
test
to
some
the
of that
cow.
stuff.
One
Yeah,
one pass in, two passes out. I mean, by the time they get done, you can tell a welder that can't weld stainless steel because if they can't weld it, they slow down to the point to where it gets so hot it starts to shrink, and then the pipe looks like it's just swelled up, and it's because they've overheated it.
mhm.
And even if they wind up getting a decent weld in it, they've ruined the material. You know, and then they get mad at you. Well, the weld's fine. Well, yeah, but it took you 3 hours to make the weld when it should have took you 35, 40 minutes, and now you've ruined the base material.
Mhm.
So I see huge applications for handheld laser in very thin sheet metal applications, um, because what I have seen in person, which has been I've been exposed a little bit to it. It doesn't take a highly skilled individual to utilize a handheld laser as it does in other arc welding process. So that's the good and the bad. Um, the bad is I think you have to be 10 times more safe with a handheld laser than you do any other arc welding process.
Right.
And if people don't pay attention to that, it's going to get them in trouble. So that's the big concern that I have is people just doing stupid stuff and getting hurt, because man, I mean, if you start reading the information on the intensity level of that laser and then you put it in your hand and you're having a bad day and not paying attention, a lot of bad stuff can happen. You know, I mean, you can't just wear a welding hood with that stuff. What most people don't understand is you're supposed to wear these special protective goggles and a welding shield. And if you
Oh,
don't
really?
do that, yes, because of the intensity of the laser is so bright, you don't want to mess up your eyes. So you're like wearing double protection on your eyes just to do it safely. And if you're not, and again, if you look on the internet, it's not shown that way. And it's but you need to read the fine print with that stuff. And I find it funny, you've got a lot of people from overseas willing to just ship those things over here in a container, and they're not accepting any liability for the equipment that they're selling.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I think there's going to be some learning curves with that. But again, I can't knock it because the technology's there. I see a void in the industry that it could be filled with, and it's going to be impressive to see where it goes. It'd be interesting to start seeing people utilize that stuff with robotic arms on small sheet metal applications, or
Mhm.
small thin sheet metal, or just small thin structural applications.
Oh, I'm sure you'll see it at Fab Tech this year.
Yeah, probably. I think you won't see the major three like ITW, Miller, or Lincoln really pushing that right away. You may see a bunch of spin-off companies doing it, because I think they're at least smart enough to approach with caution for the liability. You know what I mean? Again, you got a machine slinging an open laser around with a robotic arm. You better have some hellacious area cut
Yeah.
off with shielding and stuff like that, and you're not using normal welding screens and all that stuff. And the cost to set up an area for a laser is going to be extremely high. Again, the upfront cost is going to be expensive to do it right, but I think it'll well outweigh the return on investment if you do that up front to be safe in your production. You know,
Yeah.
but and that's it. I think it has a place. I don't think we're far off from seeing that more widely used in a safe manner. You know,
Yeah, I mean, it's just like anything else. You got to do your due diligence. I mean, set up for safety. I mean, and that's another whole rabbit hole in this industry. Is people just safety is it's becoming more prevalent nowadays. But for the longest time, like I mean, you've been in the industry long enough to see it. Like people really didn't pay attention to safety. It was not a big. It was a sign of like manhood if you didn't wear your safety glasses, or you welded with a t-shirt, or something to that effect. Like safety is becoming more prevalent. So I think with anything that's coming out, even when I teach welding, we're going to cover stick welding. Okay, here's the safety for this specific process. I'm big on task specific PPE. I've got specific gloves for every welding process. I've got different hoods for every process that I do, different jackets. Like everything that I do, I have specific PPE for it because not all processes are created the same. Like if I get into TIG welding, okay, yeah, I can wear like a light denim shirt. If I get into stick welding, okay, what position am I welding in? If I'm doing overhead, yeah, I'm probably going to throw on something a little bit thicker. But like safety is such a huge component of what we do. You've got to make sure you're doing things safe. You're doing it the right way because you want to be in this industry. At the end of the day, we're all here to make money.
yeah.
And by shortening your lifespan and being a badass out there that you're the tough guy or whatever, you're just hurting yourself at the end of the day.
No, I see it all the time, man, and it's a scary place to be. I mean, even today at our facility, we have signs up everywhere about safety glasses and wearing PPE and face shields. And it is a daily ritual to walk around and tell these welders, if you're going to walk through this shop, you got to have your safety glasses on, have this, have that. I mean, it's just constant. You're constantly repeating yourself to the point where we ask some of them to leave the facility. If they can't, we got a 3-strike rule. If you can't, we got to tell you 3 times to not hurt yourself. You ain't going to do it here.
Yep.
Out of here.
Put the guard back on the grinder, put your face shield on, put your gloves on.
And I mean, at the end of the day, because that is part of a weld test, following direction, wearing proper PPE, and, showing people that you are capable of producing sound welds in a manner without hurting yourself or hurting others, and if they're not willing to do that, then, they deserve to fail their test. And
Yeah.
again, if you have an inspector that has no welding experience and has never been exposed to that stuff, they're not going to know what right or wrong is. This is where having like a welding inspector, especially somebody doing performance qualifications, that's where that experience really, really pays off.
Yeah.
Really pays off, because he's going to see those things. They're going to jump right out at him or her, and then that's going to constitute an issue that needs to be addressed. And if it can't be addressed where the individual just doesn't feel like it's necessary, well, then you got a choice to make. Is the individual capable of welding for your company? Probably not. But safety is a huge priority. Needs to be more so than ever.
Now, do you have like a waiver that people have to sign when they come in to test your facility? Like, here's all the safety rules. You're going to abide by this, print, sign, date, and all that good stuff?
We do, and even the companies that send them make them sign waivers. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's just like anything. Whether they sign one or they don't. Most of the people that are out there, they don't even read it. They just look at it, they sign it. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's the case most of the time. They don't, they don't pay attention to those things. And you sit there and you explain to them, look, man, you're gonna have to have your proper PPE. We get guys show up and they're in their they're in their church shoes, and it's like, where are your boots? I don't have them. Well, when you go get them,
today.
Come back. We're done. We're not having this. Or that they'll show up and just, again, attire that's these polyester fishing shirts and stuff. They're not welding shirts, man. They catch fire. And if they don't catch fire, they melt. They don't. They're not proper. And you say, hey, man, go get a pair of Nomex or something out of your truck or your car, and or something. Get a pair of coveralls and suit up if you're going to be in here. And some of them do, and some of them don't, or they try not to. But it's like I talk about. Most of these guys don't even keep hydrated. You laugh. In the summertime in Texas, we have hot summers like you do in Florida, your real humid climate. It gets hot. And when you get 25 or 30 guys in welding booths, it gets real hot. And we don't have air conditioning, and I refuse that because we don't get to weld in the air conditioning, so therefore you ain't testing in the air conditioning where we're at.
Right.
But, I mean, 9 times out of 10, we're walking around making sure these guys stay hydrated. Last year, we had 2 guys, they were diabetic, taking tests, and their blood sugar dropped because they were sweating, buckets of water. They weren't staying hydrated, and man, they darn near passed out on us. And it's so we spend a lot of our time just keeping an eye on the guys, and we've had a couple of them. We set them down. We say, look, man, you're going to quit welding. You're going to come sit down in the air conditioner for a minute and cool down. Here's 2 bottles of water, and you're not going to stay on that weld until you're cooled down, because people, they can't police themselves, and before you have an issue, you got to put a stop to it. And if they can't do the simple things, what do you think is going to happen when they get out on a mega project where there's 5,000 or 6,000 other people working around them doing these things? It's just going to be worse, and unfortunately, if you're not looking out for your own safety, you shouldn't expect the person beside you to. You know what I mean? It starts with you as an individual. And again, I think sometimes we emphasize too much on, well, that individual just doesn't have enough skill to be a welder. Okay, that's great, but also, do they follow direction? Are they trying to be safe? If they're not doing the first 2, we shouldn't even be worried about them welding, or being a good inspector, because if they don't promote safe habits and they don't follow direction well, then personally, I don't want them in the industry. I don't want to be around them.
Yeah,
because they're a liability, and most people don't realize that. And unfortunately, that's something in our business that we need to pay more attention to going into the future, because what'll happen, Jason, is if we don't care about that, if we don't make that a priority, the government oversight will do it for us. So would you rather we do it as an industry,
Yep.
or let the government, and then 20 years from now, we all complain that it's just too hard to make a living in this business. I'm going to tell
Too
you,
expensive.
I also work for Gas and Supply, and I walked into my boss's office last week, and in the chemical plants and refineries, you have to have these cut 5 gloves. Have you ever seen them? It's a driver's glove or a work glove, but it's got all these rubber bumpers on the knuckles
Oh, yeah.
and the hands.
Yeah.
Dude, I suggest you try to put a pair on. You can't even pick up a baseball with them because it's like having I compare it to the astronaut gloves that they use when they're in space. They're just huge, right? And then you got these big rubber bumpers on there. Well, I was laughing because the other day I walked into my boss's office to visit with him. We had a Lincoln meeting or something going on, so we had to meet with some of the Lincoln reps, and he had a pair of Tillman TIG gloves, but they're cut 5. So they got all these ribs on the knuckles and the back hand, and I put one on. It was a large. And I said, hey, you can't even pick up a piece of tungsten or a piece of TIG wire with these gloves. He's like, no. I went out of the warehouse. I grabbed a piece of TIG wire, set it on his desk, made him put the gloves on, and he couldn't pick up an electrode or a TIG wire. And I'm like, because as an industry, we're so lazy, now we're being told we have to wear this to weld, and we can't even, it's making our job even harder. We can't do our job. But because we can't be safe, now we're being forced to somebody to tell us how we're going to be safe, right? So that's what's coming. And I mean, and that's just welding gloves, man. I'll get a pair and I'll send them to you. I want you to try to weld with them.
Okay.
I mean, it's horrible. And I laugh and I'm like, man, because, like you said, for different types of welding, you got different types of tools. When you're TIG welding and stuff, the last thing you want is to have bulky gloves. You almost want to feel your fingers through your gloves because you want to be able to move wire, or it's a more refined technique.
Yeah, you need that dexterity.
And now, like for our customers out there working in these plants, now the welders don't have a choice. Now they have to wear these things because they either the construction companies they were working for were not, giving them proper PPE, or there are too many accidents. So, and now we've got oversight, government oversight saying, well, what are you going to do different so you don't have these accidents? Oh, we're going to buy these gloves, and that's going to solve all our problems. And
it's going to create more.
I look at that stuff as a guy with experience and I laugh. But you have people out there that have no experience and they're going to be like, oh, that's a good idea. And then they're going to wonder why their welding production drops off 50% because their guys can't even pick up electrodes to put them in the stinger. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen, but we do it to ourselves as an industry. We should be more proactive and we're not, but I don't know, man. It's interesting to see where things have come and then where they're going. It's an interesting time to be in the industry. Some days I look at it and I'm thinking, man, I feel like a dinosaur, and I feel like if I'm not evolving, then I'm going to be left behind. And then there's some days when I'm like, well, I'm glad I'm a dinosaur because I got to live to see it the hard way. So, maybe we can help inspire and train some of these younger people out there so, they can, complain about being in the industry 30 years after, we're dead and gone,
Right.
And it's fun. It's a challenge most days, but, if we don't put in the effort, and take time out of our day to do these things and work with these people, again, we're our own worst enemy. We've got to take the time to try to reach out to the younger people and get them the information they need to be successful. And it's I say it's a fun, process, learning curve, you know. But I find having to work on myself all the time because people get intimidated by my voice, and I'm a loud
No,
person or energetic. Yeah, and
animated.
Juvie told me one time. He said, "You scare these young people," and I'm like, "How do I scare them? No way," you know. But yeah, I get it. I mean, when I was a kid, if I did something wrong and the guy I was working for, he'd kick all my fabrication out of the jack stands, and when it hit the ground and scattered everywhere, he'd tell me if I didn't have it done by the time he got back to work the next morning, right, just don't come back. We can't do that anymore. You know,
Mhm.
we can't hurt people's feelings.
No, you aren't feelings. I was going to say.
Yeah. So, but unfortunately, sometimes if you don't hurt feelings, people don't get to go home. So I'm of the opinion. I think there's a time and a place for that stuff, and it just depends on the situation. But yeah, we'll see where it goes. I try to be positive about where we're at as an industry. The biggest thing that I try to tell young people anymore is man, if you see a person, a colleague in the industry or in your building, and they got a lot of gray hair or no hair, spend time with them. Go eat lunch with them. Go spend time with them if you can, because there's so many years of knowledge that those individuals have that if we don't try to get some of it from them before they retire or they die on us, our industry is really going to suffer. Really going to suffer. I'm 48 years old, and I laugh because I'm not an old person, but now we're starting to get looked at as the senior people in the industry because a lot of my colleagues are 20 years my senior, and I've probably had 5 of them in the last 2 months retire. Guys that taught me my skill set, and as much as I'm disappointed that they're leaving the industry, the selfish side of me is mad because they're leaving. As a friend, all these years with them, I'm so excited that they're actually getting to spend some of their retirement money and go do things they really want to do now. And some of them are interested in staying around, on a part-time basis after about 6 months to a year, and some of them they can't wait to never answer their phone ever again.
Right.
And it's a shame that we're losing so many people so fast because it's going to be hard for our industry to recoup what little knowledge is left to be able to, make it through the next 50 years. We have a big responsibility, you know, and the responsibility's fallen on guys like us because of our age and what little experience we have to really, really try to reach out to the younger generation to ensure that they carry on what we've learned, and that's going to be the challenge. I think in the next 5 to 10 years is identifying the people that want to learn it and making sure that they have the opportunity to get the information to where they can make, good decisions in the future,
Yeah.
but
That's the main reason I keep doing the podcast is to get more of that information out there to put people on the fast track to success.
yeah,
Like, here, learn from my mistakes, learn from like all the guests' mistakes that come on the show and stuff like that, because all these people are leaving. All the dinosaurs, the welding Jedi masters and stuff. They're bouncing out of the industry. That it's going to be gone soon. So we got to capture that and retain it, and share it with the next generation, and put them on the fast track, because they're not going to have that 5, 7, 8 years to get good at what they're doing before they've really got to throw down some welds and do the hard work. The experienced people are supposed to be doing. They're going to be the experienced people without the experience.
no doubt. And that's something that I see, and it is something I worry about a lot as a business owner as well, trying to hire employees and retain, young people in our business, the training, the, consistency with, why we do things, and, trying to get the new people to understand, it's hard, man. And in some of the industry, the knowledge is already gone. it's gone. It's left the scene, and a lot of people are in denial. And I sit back and look at it as a business owner, and I'm like, ain't no sense in crying over spilt milk. We did this to ourselves. Now what do we do? You know, the last 2 weeks, I've been in the shop myself, working in the lab, working out on the floor with our younger guys that we've brought on board, because we've had to hire a lot more people because we're picking up so much work, and we've just got a lot of crazy things going on, and the guys that we have are busy, and I had an opportunity to bring on one of my colleagues that I've worked with in the past, and you know and it's just, and Judy's like, well, what are we going to do with him? I'm like, look, man, he just knows stuff. He's going to be the guy that everybody can ask questions to if I'm not around. He's like an equal to me as far as my experience level goes, but he's got a lot more experience in different ways than I do. So again, it's just having that level of experience, and he's also a little easier to approach than I am. I admit it. But so it's just and you're starting to see all the guys asking questions and asking, where do I find this, or where do I find that, and how do I do this, or how would I do that? And it's because if we don't do this, if we don't invest in our young people, this industry, we say it's bad now and it's going to be bad, but it's going to be so much worse if we don't put forth the effort to not just train people, but do it the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And then also sometimes it's like I tell our young guys, a lot of times I don't mind you making a mistake, on purpose. So you learn, I want you to learn how to fix things. And that's unfortunately the only way you can fix something is if you break it first, right? So, you got to learn along the way, so you learn to become a good problem solver. People that say they've never had to solve a problem probably aren't good at what they do, because
no shit.
you know what I mean? How did you learn? Because I'm the type of person, I don't read the directions, man. I just start emptying a box on the floor and start, okay, what do I do here? And after I put it together 3 times, I'm an expert,
Yeah.
But I mean, so many people out there learn differently. And don't get me wrong, with technology where it is, I was hanging out with my grandkids the other day, and I was asking my granddaughter something, and she just pulls something up on her tablet that she had, and she's just showing me stuff, and I'm like, wow, I didn't have this luxury when I was a kid,
right?
And I often ask myself, how much better of a person would I have been if I had had this technology at my hand at 6 and 7 years old, 8, 9 years old? It's hard as an older person, because you think the learning curve for the younger people is a lot longer now, and it may be not. Maybe they do learn stuff faster, right? But it's learning how to communicate with them, and also they need to learn how to do things the way we did it too, so they get the best of both worlds,
Yeah.
Because when that tablet's broken, it ain't working, or there's no internet or Wi-Fi, they're going to have to bust out the soapstone and start drawing pictures on the fab table.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
And so, I mean, I try to tell people it's good to have that cool stuff, but you also need to how to do it the hard way, just in case you ever get into that situation.
Yeah, because I mean, things are going to fail. I mean, that's the one thing that's guaranteed with technology. Like, case in point, we had it set up tonight. Like, it took me 20 minutes to get all this stuff set up, and I kind of do this every week. So I mean,
Yes,
technology fails, things go wrong, things need to be updated, and sometimes you just got to figure out a way. You got to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And if you only know one way to do something and that way fails, you're screwed. You need alternative routes.
No, I laughed the other day. We were automating some of our documentation in house, in the shop, and I think I hurt one of the guys' feelings, because we started doing some cloud-based stuff for project management on all these projects we have, and he was all excited, man, and I said, man, that's really cool, I think it's really awesome. Y'all are doing a great job. And he said, well, let me show you how to use it. I said, hey, let me stop you right there, Han. I'm never going to learn that. Like, it's never going to happen. So let's just forget that. But you're doing a great job, you know?
Right.
I'm like, you just keep it up. But I'm not that guy. It's not going to happen, right? So
You got to know your limitations.
yeah. But no, I mean, and then so, you know, I think as a business owner, as much as I'm scared of some of that stuff, you know, our young people that we have are very, very good at that, you know? So how do we let that come into our business too and help us move into the future? And I'm telling you, man, it's some of the stuff that we're working on for the next 5 or 6 years is pretty impressive. I couldn't tell you how to do it, but they're really good at it, you know?
Yeah.
And, I mean, but it's, I'm open to the fact to let them do it and not so hard-headed to be like, well, this is the way we've always done it. We're just going to, you know, work through it. No, man, you've got to give people the opportunity to bring their ideas into the situation to see where it can go to you know, because there's things that they've learned that I haven't. So
Yeah.
I can't shoot down what they're doing because I haven't walked in their shoes. So it's good to see. And they teach me stuff, you know, a lot. And it's you know, you got to be open to that too as an older person with experiences. You're never too old to learn. So, you know, even the youngest person out there or the youngest person in your group or your crew or in your company has something good that they can offer to the situation. You know, it may be minute, but it can always be the right thing, you know? So it's impressive when, you know, you open yourself up to those things to see what potential that your, you know, your employees and your colleagues will have if you give them the opportunity to do it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But that's, I think, some of the hardest things sometimes with us old people is sometimes we're a little hard headed with change, you know?
Can be.
And I try to make a conscious effort to not be that person all the time. You know, me and Juvie get in arguments a lot about the business sometimes. They're not arguments. Let me rephrase, discussions.
Heated
About,
debates.
yes, about how we would do this or do that, and, you know, how we could do this and do that. And we've looked at some things and, you know, settle on others, and we don't agree a lot. I mean, you'd be surprised. There's a lot of times we do not agree on a situation of how we should move forward on something. And sometimes I'll give in, sometimes he'll give in, sometimes we just butt heads, and then we just try to do two things at once to see what'll work out the best as like a beta test. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, if you're open to those things, you'll be more successful, you know, and that's some of the things that I've seen with inspection in welding, as well as being open to see things and look outside the box to help, you know, facilitate a solution when there's something that's not working,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it's not, and being open to admitting that you're kind of outside your comfort level to be able to make those decisions, you know, because a lot of people won't open up when they're in too deep on a situation, and it tends to hurt them more. And when if they just, you know, when they got to that fork in the road and they didn't know to take a left or take a right, they should have just, you know, went and got help, or, you know, made a phone call to a colleague and asked them, hey, which is the best path forward? You know, help me choose a direction so I can keep moving forward, and not be scared to do that, you know?
Yeah, you got to know when to ask for help.
Yeah.
And don't be too prideful to ask for help.
No, especially in the welding business, like you were talking about earlier, with all the different things that are out there. It's so important that, you know, you network, and, you know, with a group of colleagues that you know, you can pull from their expertise to help guide you in situations, so you don't, you know, run into a wall. Because, man, so many times I see it all too often. You know, you've got the smartest people in the world involved in a situation, and then they go and ask the person with the simplest mentality about something, and he's had the solution the whole time, but nobody was open to ask him.
Brave enough
And
to
it's
ask
like,
him, yeah.
And he's sitting over there just shaking his head at him, laughing. And it's like, man, what would you do? Well, I just do this and do that, and everything works. And well, let's go try this and that and see if it works, And more times than not, it's the little things that come back to, turn into the avalanche. But it's one of the things that draws me to the welding industry still after doing it all these years is the challenges, that you face.
That's the fun part.
Yes, and it's good, man. It's if you don't like static and you like dynamic things and you like things to change, the welding business is a good business for you to be in. Whether you're in inspection or weld engineering or mechanical engineering or materials or just welding, or pipe fitting, because there's just always so many different things you can do to keep it fresh, And how many times do we say it, man? I go to work and say, well, it can't get any crazier this week. I've seen it all. And then next week, somebody calls and something happens, and it's like, well, I've never seen this before, and it's been 30 years, and here we are, So it's very interesting how after all these years you still want to get up and go to work and do this stuff,
Yeah.
For sure.
No, and it's fun too. I mean, that's what I enjoy is the challenge. It's never stagnant. I mean, there's always something new to learn. There's always something different going on. That's the cool thing about it. It's like you think you've got one thing mastered, and then something else comes at you.
Yeah.
It's a constant state of improvement. So that's what I've always enjoyed about the welding industry. And if you're too comfortable with something, maybe it's time to retire. But I don't think I'll ever hit that. I don't think I'll ever hit that pinnacle.
No, and I laughed
with it.
Yeah, this afternoon I was having a conversation with one of our guys in our technical services group, and he's been on that computer for the last 2 days, pounding out weld record forms and filling out documentation of for monitoring PQRs and stuff, and he looked at me and he said, "Man, some days I just wish I could put my hood back on and go weld out in the shop." Man, I said, you didn't know you were going to be a secretary too. Nobody ever told me that was part of my role. Oh, you're going to be a secretary and a data entry clerk. What the heck is data entry? I want to be a welding inspector. No, man, let me explain. I'm going to give you this here laptop, and you're going to learn to be an expert in Word and Excel and all these other, great programs out there. And you're like, what? No, man, that's our job. We used to have, people that would do that for us 30 years ago. You'd have a woman in an office with a big old IBM typewriter pounding away at them keys. After you hand wrote stuff, they'd put it in a digital format. And today, man, we got laptops. Most of these guys, these traveling inspectors, especially these pipeline guys, they got pedestals bolted to the floor of their floorboard of their truck, and the laptop's right there, right at their console, and they can just sit there in their truck and print out reports and inspection reports and fill out daily reports, and they don't have to wait to go to the hotel. They do it right there on the spot, and never in a million years did we think, oh, a welding inspector, that would be part of his duty or her duty. But today, we don't even think about it. I mean, if you're not computer literate, don't even get into the inspection world.
And need not apply.
Better be,
that's all it is.
Be really sharp. Yeah. And that was something 20 years ago, 30 years ago. If you'd have told me I needed to have computer skills to get into the welding industry as far as inspection, I would have laughed at you. Well, here I am, and I use computers every day. I can't do my business. I can't do my job without them. Everything's generated off that laptop.
Yeah, it's a necessity now.
Yes. And it's funny how even you see older people, some people can't even turn a computer on. And then I've seen colleagues that are older that can do things with that laptop that I couldn't dream of doing. It's pretty funny. That's for
early
sure.
Adopters.
Yes. And I have my limitations, but I do what I can, and I'm not scared to network about that as well either. Like if when you get on a project, if you've got one guy that's really handy with a computer, normally he's the guy doing all the data entry. And you let the guys that ain't good at that stuff they can go out in the field and flag welds and do visuals and line up NDE crews and all that good stuff and chase down the packages, getting stuff signed off and bought off. But you don't want that guy doing computer work,
Right.
if you're smart the way you set up these projects. So, but it's there again, it's you got to have all those skill sets to be able to make it though.
Yeah,
That's
it takes a crew. It takes an entire team. You got to know your strengths, your weaknesses, work on your strengths, and help others with their weaknesses. Like whatever you're good at, you help others with. I mean, that's what you've been doing with me for the past couple of years. I really appreciate it, and I mean, it's helped me immensely because like you don't know what you don't know. So I run into shit all the time. It's great to be able to have somebody I can lean on and call up and say, hey, I've never ran into this. And you're like, oh yeah, man, we do that all the time over here, and it's just like, boom, here you go. Look at, QW, this, that, and the other thing. And oh shit, it's right there. Okay. Yeah. I'd have been scratching my head for hours.
I had a welding engineer for one of our EPCs the other day. We were talking about doing destructive testing in ASME. And he said, well, if you roll out a pipe coupon, you still need, 4 bends. And I'm like, no, go read QW 452, blah, blah, blah. I couldn't remember the exact paragraph or the table. I said, no, man, 2 bends. Code calls out 2 bends. And then you got to read the notes. If you go fixed position 5G, 6G, or the 2G, 5G thing, at that point is when they add the other bends. But it just doesn't come right out and say those things. You have to go and find it.
Devil's in the details.
And even him, he looked at me and he said, Scott, I've read that table 3 times and I didn't understand it till you put it in words to me. Until you explained it to me, I didn't understand what that table meant. And I'm like, I've always been the guy, because I'm not I don't have an IQ of 10,000. I try to look things, at a level of layman's terms. Okay, I'm going to look at this as a layman, and I'm going to explain it to you as a layman. And sometimes that works. For really smart people, they don't like it because I'm slow at explaining what I'm talking about. But I try to get the point across in a manner where you'll understand it. And hopefully, you'll be able to teach somebody else that down the road. Because, I had a discussion with a couple of code committee members of ASME a couple of years ago, and we were all teaching a class together and for AWS, and they had a bunch of people in their class that have never used their code book. And what they found when they spent 2.5 days with these people is they were having to explain the code book to them in a way they've never had to explain a code book, as if you were talking to an infant. And one of the code committee members came back and said, man, I always thought the users of our code were more advanced in how to read the code. And I laughed at him and I said, no, man, this is what I've been telling y'all since I've known you. 90% of my customers can't read a code book.
Yeah.
They don't understand. They don't have your level of knowledge. And y'all assume because they use your code that they can read it like you. And they can't. Hell, I can't,
Yeah, it's all legalese.
And there was like a light bulb went off and they're like, man, we really need to do a better job as a code committee to dumb it down to where people can understand it. I said, exactly. Because if I didn't have people I could call to dumb it down for me so I could retain it, and, there are some books out there to help with that support, like How to Read This Book for Dummies. There's books like that out there for the ASME documents, to try to give you the intent of what the code committee's trying to say in a way you'll understand it. It's a very hard way to make a living if you don't have an outreach group of people that can help you walk through that. Mm-hmm. It's almost impossible because you're going to do half everything you're going to do will be wrong. It's like I used to tell people all the time, there should be a disclaimer on every code book for welding. If you don't have welding experience, don't open page 2, and that should be on page 1, because people that don't have welding experience will read that book and they will not interpret it the same way as somebody that has welding experience.
Yeah.
Because the code committee, and they'll tell you this as individuals, we assume the people that utilize this document have a level of knowledge that is sufficient to utilize this document. And most of them don't, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that's another one of those things. You think it takes, 5, 6, 7, 8 years to get good at welding or get good at inspection. Hell, man, I've been reading code books for 30 years, and there's days I'll read something, a paragraph I've read 1,000 times, and I'm like, huh.
Light bulb
so that's
goes
what
off.
it really means.
Yeah. I've done that.
Yeah, and it's again, that's what makes this industry fun, because you're always learning something if you apply yourself, and that's what keeps me coming back. Is it's there, there's things that are the same, but every day it's something different, So
Yeah.
it's enjoyable. It's I can't complain about the career choices that I've made with the industry, even though some of it was by accident. I never thought I'd be in an inspection. I always thought I'd just be a welder. I mean, I never had any intentions of, becoming an inspector. It was an opportunity that came to me. I really didn't volunteer for it. I just did it. I thought it would be a short-term gig, and then I'd go right back to welding. And then it just was something that fit me, suited me good, and here we are, and I still love to weld when I get the opportunity. But I had a laugh the other day. I had a client call me, and they said, "Hey, we need a welder. We're trying to redo our code stamps, and the welder we had can't be there the day they got to do their code stamp review." And I said, "I'll do it for you." So next week I got to take a damn welding test for this company. So on the day of their code stamp renewal, I get to weld on their test sample in front of the state boiler inspector. And hey, I mean, I'm not even going to charge them. I'm just going to do it to have fun. I'm going to take a day off from work and I'm going to go weld. And they're going to ask me questions, and I'm going to have a good time. And but I mean, it's funny. Hell, I hope I can pass the welding test. I may not do too well on that. You never know.
Were you just doing a bell hole the other day?
Well, yeah, I welded up I did some pipeline samples for a NT company that needed some.
I thought that was you under the hood.
Yeah, I had some fun, But I mean, at the end of the day, it's hilarious how it's just like riding a bike, though. I mean, if you're not doing that every day, it takes a little while to get the rust off before you can, ride without training wheels. But it's fun. It makes the world go round, But I'm fortunate that I'm in that opportunity where I can still do both, And I find it funny. I actually, at some point, I weld better now than I did when I was welding, because I know more about what's going on and I pay more attention.
What's happening in that arc.
Yeah. So you tend to slow down and put a little more effort into it than I used to, because I didn't know what I was doing 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think welding's helped me become a better inspector, and inspecting's helped me become a better welder.
Yeah, oh, no doubt. No doubt. And I think it's good to see both sides of the aspect, because it gives you that opportunity to, advance, and not be scared to see different things, I hate being stuck in a rut. I always like doing different things and not being in a line following people and what everything else they're doing. I always try to be on the front end of what's going on in the welding business and, figuring it out. And I'm going to fail a lot, but we're not going to quit, trying to learn it. And then, we've been fortunate to work with some pretty cool organizations and help make some really big changes in the code world in the welding industry, and some for the good. And some of them we found that what we were trying to do just wasn't going to work. But you don't know till you try, and that's been fun too along the way, is doing some of these studies and being part of some of these organizations, research and development projects and stuff, and getting to see, the results of some of those things. And sometimes they come out with results that you expect. Some of them, sometimes they don't, but it's pretty cool. That's been some of the fun stuff that I've been involved with in the last couple of years. We've had some good times with it, for sure.
Yeah, it's a fun industry.
No doubt.
Everything about it. I mean, the people, the processes, the stuff you get into, the challenges. I mean, it's been a blast so far. Like, I've only been in it 26 years, but I'm looking forward to putting in at least another 20.
Yeah, I doubt I'll ever quit, per se. I may just dial back how much I do. Obviously, like here lately, I've been 7 days a week traveling all over the country. I keep telling myself I'm not going to travel anymore, and yet, I may find myself on a plane in 2 weeks for a day or two or three. But I try to dial that back a little bit. Obviously, with having all the grandkids and family stuff going on and extra hobbies, you try to have time for those things. And things will calm down in our industry a little bit. Turnaround season's starting to slow down a little bit. We'll get through this month and start in most of April, and then it'll slow down in May, and we'll be on the summertime, run for a while until it, picks back up in the fall. So, it's because it's been pretty crazy this year, man.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
Crazy's good though.
No, it is. It is. We've learned a lot and done some cool stuff, but it's at the end of the day, I was telling one customer, I'm like, this is all we're doing for you, right? This is the last hot job, emergency job we have until your refinery goes back, gets back online. Yeah, man. This is it. I promise we're not going to kill you anymore. We finished this one today, and then the call came in. Well, I think we need one more procedure. And I'm like, look, man, it ain't happening this weekend. We'll start it on Monday. Like, we're done. We can't do no more, but I mean, it's just, it's that time of year, and there's a lot of money that changes hands and in these projects and trying to get these facilities back online as fast as possible is always a big thing in your back of your mind, keeping, keeping that target, and it's not easy, especially when you start digging into equipment and you find more issues than what you figured you had, and they want to keep that oil in date, so that's when the stress comes involved. We had 2 clients this year. They had 2 major turnarounds, January, February, and the day the turnaround started, their scope doubled in size, and they wanted them to bring in like 60, 70 extra people, and they're like, where do you want me to get them from? That we don't have the manpower. You're lucky we had the manpower to start today, and it's just been that way all year long. Just so far, it's just been crazy. It's been a good market if you want to be in the inspection or the welding business because you don't have a problem finding a job, right now. But you got to travel. But it's been
the work's never close to home. That's what sucks.
No, it is not. I think that's something that it's a disclaimer that should be told to everybody that wants to be in this industry is, these plants aren't in your backyard. They don't build pipelines in your backyard, and offshore platforms are not close to close to the beach.
Right.
I mean, all these things, and some of these locations are not the most desirable locations that they have these facilities. And you need to know that going into it, because you may not want to be there, And I think that's the misconception. A lot of people don't understand all the details of those things. But I don't know.
You'll find out when you get into it.
No doubt, brother. No doubt. No doubt.
Well, damn, Scott, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, man. I know we get to chat quite a bit, but like nobody ever gets to hear what we're talking about. So it's I appreciate you coming on and chatting on the podcast. Like, to get you here by yourself without having a group session going on. It's been awesome.
Well, I appreciate you having me, man. And if there's anything you need, just give us a holler. We'll come up with something to talk about.
Oh, we'll do. We'll have to link up at some point. Are you coming out for Fab Tech this year? Or are you guys going to be still busy? Because it's October.
I'm going to Fab Tech Mexico.
Okay.
That's in Monterey, I think, in May. And I'll probably be at Fab Tech in Orlando this year. More than likely, I'll come for 1 or 2 days.
Okay. Yeah, you at least got to come out and check out my school.
No, I'll be there. I'll be there. I'll show up. No doubt. No doubt.
Cool, man. Well, again, I appreciate it.
No problem, brother.
All right, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
Oh, anytime. You got an open door here.
Thanks, man.
All right, ladies and gents, thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. I hope y'all enjoyed the show. If you get a moment, please leave a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. It really helps me out. I hope y'all have a great rest of your week. Stay safe out there, and until next time, make every weld better than your last.